Every third Sunday, the folding tables came out, the aluminum foil came off, and the real service began. The sanctuary had the sermon, but that fellowship hall had the mac and cheese, the smothered pork chops, and the peach cobbler that made you forget what the preacher even said. From small wooden churches in rural Mississippi in the 1940s to brick fellowship halls in Memphis and Detroit through the 1980s, these suppers fed entire communities on covered dishes and cast iron. Number 74 on this list is a bread pudding that deacons used to fight over. Number 31 is a vegetable casserole that disappeared when the church mothers who made it passed on. And number 12 carried so much hot sauce, the children were not allowed near it. These were not just potluck dinners. They were the original community table where every dish told you exactly who made it and where they came from. Hit subscribe so the next one reaches you too. Here are 100 soul foods served at Southern church suppers through the years. Number 21, hog head cheese. Hog head cheese was Sousa's country cousin, denser, more peppery, and shaped like a brick. A butcher on 63rd Street would sell a whole hog head for 75 cents in 1962, and a grandmother from Greenville, Mississippi would carry it home on the bus wrapped in newspaper. She boiled it with salt, black pepper, sage, red pepper, and a cup of cider vinegar until the meat slipped from the skull. She chopped the meat fine, packed it into a bread pan, poured the reduced broth on top, and weighted it down overnight with a flat iron. Sliced thick and eaten on Saturday afternoon with white onion, it was the supper of men who had worked a half day at the rolling mill. It fed full grown adults for a full week. Picture that arithmetic. Picture what that skill meant in a kitchenette with no refrigerator and one burner. Number 10, dirty rice. In Louisiana, dirty rice got its name from the chopped chicken livers and gizzards that gave white rice a speckled appearance. A senior sauteed the livers and gizzards in a skillet with onion, celery, and green pepper. Then the rice went in with broth and simmered covered for 20 minutes. The livers gave it depth. The gizzards gave it texture. The vegetables gave it Louisiana's holy trinity. A pound of chicken livers cost 29 cents in 1982. For a senior concerned about anemia, this was medicine disguised as supper. Doctors now recommend iron-rich foods, but Louisiana's grandmothers have been prescribing dirty rice for generations without knowing the science. A retired longshoreman in Baton Rouge made dirty rice every Sunday because his late wife had made it every Sunday. He used her skillet and her recipe card stained with grease. The stains were the best part. They meant she had touched that card 1,000 times. Stewed okra and tomatoes over cornbread carried its history in every bite, though nobody at the table was thinking about history when the bowls came out. Okra traveled to the American South through West African foodways and the gullet tradition of stewing it long with tomatoes until it released its natural thickening turned a simple vegetable into its own sauce. She'd slice the okra into rounds and fry it briefly in bacon grease before the tomatoes went in. That step cut the sliminess that put people off, a detail she knew and most outsiders didn't. Canned tomatoes, salt, black pepper, onion, sometimes a pinch of sugar if they tasted sharp, simmered until the okra had fully softened and the whole thing had body. The cornbread, already baked in the cast iron, got broken into the bottom of each bowl, and the stew ladled hot over the top, soaking in and becoming part of the dish. It was a meatless supper that nobody called meatless. It was just Tuesday. And if the okra pot was the supper built from what the garden gave up, macaroni and tomatoes was the dish that proved you didn't need an oven to put something serious on the table. Elbow macaroni cooked 8 minutes, drained, then returned to the same pot with a can of diced tomatoes, juice and all, a thick pat of butter, diced onion, salt, and black pepper, stirred over low heat until the tomatoes and butter made a sauce and the macaroni soaked it up. One pot, 15 minutes, nothing left on the plate. This was not baked mac and cheese. This was something older and quieter. A one-pot staple in African American homes throughout the 1950s and 60s, when a can of tomatoes cost a dime and a box of elbows cost a nickel, and together they could silence a table full of hungry children. The simplest version had 4 ingredients. She still made it better than anyone who tried to copy her, even when they had the same 4 ingredients in the same pot. Number 15, hog head cheese. Despite the name, there is no cheese in it. Hog head cheese is a cold meat terrine made from the cooked down head of a pig, set in its own natural gelatin, seasoned with vinegar, black pepper, and whatever spices a family kept on hand. The head had to be boiled for hours until every piece of meat fell from the bone. Then the meat was chopped, mixed with the reduced broth, poured into a mold, and left to set in the refrigerator overnight. By morning, it was solid enough to slice. A man ate it cold on white bread or crackers, usually for supper on a hot summer evening when nobody wanted to stand over a stove. In Louisiana, Mississippi, and the Carolinas, hog head cheese sat in a deli case next to the bologna and Braunschweiger. Local butchers made it in-house. The skill required to make it properly died with the generation that learned it, and the commercial versions that survive today are a shadow of what once sat on a working man's plate. Here's the part that doesn't get talked about. In the 1970s, the cuts of meat that built these suppers cost almost nothing because the rest of America didn't want them. Neck bones, pig feet, oxtails, fatback, organ meat. These were the parts the meat packing industry threw away or sold for pennies to whoever would take them. Black families took them. They turned what the industry called waste into food that held a man upright through 12-hour shifts and 90-degree summers. Then something shifted. The food world discovered these cuts. Oxtails showed up on restaurant menus at $40 a plate. Neck bones appeared in magazine recipes written by chefs who had never set foot in a shotgun house. The prices climbed. The men who had eaten these cuts their entire lives were priced out of their own food. The working man's supper wasn't forgotten. It was taken. Number 15, butter beans cooked down with smoked ham hock. Butter beans were the velvet of the garden, softer than field peas and richer on the tongue. The cook shelled them on the porch and dropped them into a pot on the wood stove with a smoked ham hock, a little water, and salt. The pot stayed on low heat for the rest of the afternoon. The ham hock broke down slowly, giving up its salt and smoke into a broth that turned the beans from pale green to something closer to cream. By supper time, the butter beans had gone soft enough to mash against the roof of the mouth, and the ham hock had given everything it had. The meat that clung to the bone was a bonus. The broth was the point. Poured over rice with a piece of cornbread on the side, a pot of butter beans could stretch across 2 suppers without losing anything in the reheating. Number 1, skillet spaghetti. Not Italian spaghetti, soul food spaghetti. Ground beef browned in a cast iron skillet, a can of tomato sauce poured over it, the dried noodles broken in half and laid right into the same pan with enough water to cook them through without ever touching a separate pot. Everything in one skillet, no colander, no boiling water on a second burner. The noodles absorbed the meat sauce as they softened, and the whole thing came out thick, sticky, almost like a casserole, and nothing like what any Italian grandmother would recognize. This was a Black American invention, a working class adaptation of an immigrant food that got reworked into something entirely new. It fed families across the South and the Great Migration cities from the 1950s through the 1990s. It was cheap It was enormous. One skillet made enough for 6 people, and the leftovers went into the refrigerator for tomorrow. And it has disappeared, not because the ingredients are gone, but because the method is gone. The next generation boils the noodles in a separate pot. They use jar sauce from the store. They follow the directions on the back of the box. The skillet spaghetti was never really about spaghetti. It was about understanding that one pan could do everything if you knew your heat and your timing and your patience. That knowledge is what vanished. Number 25, fried potatoes and onions. A cast iron skillet, a few potatoes peeled and sliced thin, half an onion cut into rings, and a spoonful of bacon grease. That was supper. Big Mama got the grease smoking hot, laid the potatoes in a single layer, and let them sit until the bottoms turned golden and crisp. Then the onions went in. She flipped everything once, maybe twice, seasoned with salt and pepper, and covered the skillet to let the steam finish the work. The potatoes came out creamy inside and crunchy outside, tangled up with soft, sweet onion. Children ate this with white bread and ketchup. Adults ate it straight off the skillet with a fork. A 5-pound bag of potatoes lasted a week in the pantry, and on a hot Tuesday night, a full skillet of fried potatoes fed the house for the cost of almost nothing. Number 13, fried green tomatoes at the end of summer. The last green tomatoes hung on the vines in late September, too cold to ripen, too good to waste. A grandmother in Birmingham picked them, sliced them a 1/4 inch thick, salted them, and let them sweat on a paper towel for 10 minutes. She dredged each slice in seasoned cornmeal and pan-fried them in bacon grease until the cornmeal went bronze and the inside went tender. 3 minutes aside, she ate 6 slices with a piece of Wonder Bread and a glass of buttermilk. Free if she grew them. 20 cents a pound at the curb market if she did not. If you ever stood at the screen door waiting for the smell, you know this kind of supper was the cheapest kind of joy. The garden told her what supper was. The skillet did the rest. Brunswick stew could feed an entire congregation from a single large pot, simmering over outdoor fires at church barbecues and homecomings. Church mothers combined whatever proteins were available, often chicken and pork with tomatoes, corn, lima beans, and potatoes. Everything cooked together for hours until meats shredded and vegetables broke down into thick, hearty stew, satisfying the hungriest members. The dish originated in the South, with Virginia and Georgia both claiming creation, but African American cooks made it their own through generations. Brunswick stew appeared at cemetery cleanings, outdoor revivals, and all-day singings where large crowds needed feeding. The long cooking time meant it could simmer unattended while services continued. It represented community and abundance even when individual ingredients were humble.
Sweet potato pie with nutmeg was the signature dessert distinguishing African American church suppers, a pie so beloved that families guarded recipes and church mothers competed silently. Sweet potatoes were roasted until tender, then mashed smooth and mixed with eggs, evaporated milk, brown sugar, butter, vanilla, cinnamon, and generous nutmeg that gave filling its distinctive warmth. The mixture was poured into flaky crusts and baked until filling set firm, but remained creamy, with tops developing slight sheen. Churchwomen made multiple pies for every supper, knowing sweet potato pie would disappear quickly. Sweet potatoes were inexpensive year-round and stored well in pantries, making them practical for feeding dozens. The pie represented African American culinary tradition at its finest, with roots tracing to West African yam preparations. Children grew up knowing sweet potato pie was superior to pumpkin pie, understanding this was their dessert, their tradition, their taste of home.
Number 16, candied yams. The yams were not yams at all. They were orange sweet potatoes sold in a 10-pound bundle for 50 cents at the truck that came up from Arkansas every Saturday and parked on 39th Street. A grandmother from Tuskegee would peel them thick, slice them into rounds, and layer them in a baking dish with brown sugar, butter, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a splash of orange juice. They baked in a borrowed oven for an hour and a half until the syrup turned dark and sticky and the edges caramelized. Children fought over the corner pieces. She served them next to salt-cured ham on Sunday afternoon. The dish cost less than 30 cents to make and fed 8 people. That was the old arithmetic of Black Sunday dinner when the table was small and the generosity was large. Number 20, fried okra and potatoes. In the Deep South, okra grew in every backyard garden from June through October. You sliced it thin, diced the potato, and fried them together in cast iron with bacon grease until the okra turned crisp and the potatoes turned golden. A dusting of cornmeal kept the okra from getting slimy. That was it. The roots of okra traced directly to West Africa, where the plant had been cultivated for centuries before it crossed the Atlantic. For a senior with a garden, this meal was free. A pound of okra cost 49 cents in 1986 at the store. The bacon grease was saved from breakfast, sitting in the coffee can beside the stove. A retired nurse in Montgomery made fried okra and potatoes every Tuesday from May through September for 15 years. She said, "Summer had a taste. This was it." Souse meat on white bread was the supper you either grew up knowing about or you didn't, and there was no middle ground. Souse, pressed, pickled pork made from the trimmed and cooked meat of a hog's head, set in its own gelatin with vinegar, black pepper, sage, and red pepper flakes, then chilled until it's sliced clean, live behind the counter at local black-owned butcher shops through the 1950s and 60s, sold by the pound in white paper. It came home to the refrigerator and got sliced cold onto white bread with hot sauce and sometimes a thin ring of raw onion. No cooking, no heating, no fire, just the cold meat and the sharp vinegar hit of the pickling and the heat of the sauce. It required no stove and no time, which made it perfect for the nights when there was nothing left in anyone. The butcher shops that made it are almost all gone. The souse went with them. But if souse was the supper that needed no cooking at all, the Monday chicken soup was the supper built from everything Sunday had already given up. She'd roasted a whole chicken on Sunday, and by evening, nothing remained but the carcass, stripped nearly bare, the bones still holding their marrow and all the roasted flavor from the oven. Monday morning, that carcass went into a pot with cold water and whatever vegetables were on hand, onion, celery, carrot, if there was one, brought to a boil, then dropped to a simmer for 2 or 3 hours until the broth had pulled every bit of flavor from the bones and the kitchen had filled with that low, patient smell that meant something good was happening. The carcass came out, any remaining meat picked off and returned to the pot. Egg noodles or rice went in for the last 20 minutes. Salt, pepper, done. The cost of that soup was essentially nothing, made from what had already been eaten. Nobody wasted anything in those kitchens, and nobody who ate that soup on a cold Monday evening ever forgot exactly how it tasted. Mustard greens and pot liquor was one of those suppers where the broth was more important than anything solid in the pot. A piece of fatback or a smoked neck bone went into the pot first with water and onion, brought to a boil until the fat rendered and the water turned gold. Then a full mess of mustard greens, washed 3 times because grit in greens is a character flaw, stripped from their stems and torn, went in and cooked down hard for 15 to 20 minutes. Mustard greens cooked faster than collards, which was the whole point on a weeknight when nobody had time for a 2-hour simmer. The pot liquor that resulted was thick with minerals and fat and so deeply flavored that the real supper was what you drank, not what you chewed. You poured it over cornbread in a bowl, You sipped it straight. Some elders drank it as medicine, and they weren't wrong. Pot liquor carried iron, calcium, and vitamins that kept undernourished communities nourished when nothing else could. Number 13, salmon croquettes. Canned pink salmon, mashed with egg and cracker crumbs, shaped into patties, fried in grease until the outside turned golden and crisp. One can made 6 patties. A man could eat 3 of them with white bread and be full. The women who made them bought the cheap pink salmon, never the expensive red sockeye, and the bones inside were soft enough to crumble right into the mix. Salmon croquettes were a Friday supper in many black households, partly from Catholic neighbor influence on Southern food culture, partly because fish was cheaper than meat at the end of the week. They had a crispy outside and a soft, briny middle that was satisfying in a way frozen fish fillets never managed. When those frozen fillets flooded grocery stores in the 1980s, the can of salmon moved to the back of the shelf. Making croquettes required effort. The frozen aisle required none. Number 8, squirrel and dumplings. Squirrel was the most reliable game in the Delta woods, easier to find than rabbit and available year-round. A boy with a rifle or a slingshot could bring home 2 or 3 in an afternoon, and the cook had them skinned and in the pot before dark. She cut each squirrel into pieces, browned them in lard on the wood stove, covered them with water, and let the pot simmer until the meat pulled from the bone. The broth took on a flavor somewhere between dark chicken and something wilder, something that tasted like hickory bark and creek water. When the meat was done, the cook dropped spoonfuls of flour dough into the simmering liquid and clamped the lid down tight. The dumplings steamed until they puffed and turned silky on the outside. 2 squirrels and a pot of dumplings fed a family of 5, and the only cost was the afternoon a boy spent sitting against a sweet gum tree, waiting. Number 19, ham and red-eye gravy. A thick slice of country ham, fried in a dry skillet until the fat rendered out and the lean edges went dark and tight. Then a pour of black coffee straight into the hot pan. That was the entire recipe. The coffee hit the ham drippings and the rendered grease and turned into a thin, bitter, deeply salty gravy, the color of a red clay road after rain. The name came from the way the fat pooled in the center of the pan and looked like a bloodshot eye staring up at the ceiling. This supper goes back to the early 1800s, and in the rural black South, it lasted as a common weeknight meal through the mid-20th century. Country ham was cheap because it was preserved, not fresh. Salt cured and smoked over hickory, it could hang in a smokehouse for months without spoiling. A single thick slice fried properly could feed a grown man, and the red-eye gravy stretched it further when you poured it over rice or used a biscuit to sop up every last drop from the plate. Andrew Jackson is said to have demanded red-eye gravy from his cook at the Hermitage, and the dish was common in both black and white Southern kitchens for generations after that. But country ham stopped being cheap. By the 1990s, it became a specialty product, dry cured and aged, selling for $12 to $15 a pound at gourmet shops and mail order catalogs. The gravy followed the ham into extinction. Nobody makes red-eye gravy with store-bought deli ham because it does not work. The chemistry is wrong, the smoke is missing, the grease does not render the same way, and so the dish died with the ham that made it possible. Number 18, Vienna sausages on white bread. Open the can, drain the liquid, lay 4 or 5 of those small sausages on a slice of bread with mustard or hot sauce, fold it and eat. That was a summer supper in more houses than anyone likes to admit. Vienna sausages required no refrigeration until opened, no cooking, and no skill. They were salty, soft, and filling enough to get through an evening. Big Mama kept them next to the sardines and the potted meat on nights when the heat had taken everyone's appetite and the thought of standing over a flame felt like cruelty. Vienna sausages solved the problem without adding a single degree of warmth to the kitchen. They were not glamorous. Nobody bragged about serving them, but they kept people fed when nothing else seemed worth the effort. Number 21, hot dogs and beans, the Vienna sausage variant. A grandmother in Cincinnati could not always afford a pack of ballpark franks at $1.29. When your check came up short, you reached for the small can. She opened a can of Armour Vienna sausages, drained the brine, sliced them into coins, and stirred them into a pot of Bush's pork and beans with a tablespoon of yellow mustard and a spoon of Domino brown sugar. The whole pot took 15 minutes. She ate it from a chipped Corel bowl with a square of Jiffy cornbread on the side. Her grandsons called it puppy bowls because the sausage rounds looked like they had been scooped from a tin of dog food. They ate 3 helpings each. She never corrected them. Your pot was empty before the Andy Griffith rerun ended. Fried corn with bacon was a late summer dish that appeared on church fellowship tables when gardens overflowed with sweet corn still warm from the field. Church mothers cut fresh kernels from the cob, scraping the milky liquid that would thicken the dish naturally. Bacon was fried crisp in cast iron, then crumbled while corn cooked in rendered fat with onions until tender and caramelized. Seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and sometimes sugar, the dish let corn's natural sweetness shine while bacon added smokiness. It appeared at summer revivals and homecoming celebrations when fresh produce was abundant. Fried corn represented the connection between church communities and the land, a reminder that the best food came from nearby gardens. The dish has faded as fewer families grow their own corn.
Cabbage stewed with ham-filled fellowship halls with its distinctive aroma, transforming inexpensive vegetables into something hearty through slow cooking with pork. Cabbage heads were quartered and added to large pots with ham hocks, onions, garlic, black pepper, and sometimes vinegar that brightened the flavors. The cabbage cooked down until tender, absorbing smoky richness from ham while the ham became fall-apart tender. The result was soft cabbage and flavorful broth that people ate with spoons, sopping up liquid with cornbread and picking meat from ham hocks. Cabbage was among cheapest vegetables available year-round, with heads costing pennies and lasting weeks in storage. The dish stretched small amounts of meat to feed large crowds, with ham hocks providing enough flavor to make cabbage taste rich. Church women made enormous pots that sat on stoves for hours, filling buildings with smells announcing supper. The cabbage represented practical cooking that honored tradition while feeding communities affordably.
Number 18, pig ear sandwich. Long before Lim's Barbecue made rib tips famous on 75th Street in 1968, the pig ear sandwich was the working man's supper of the South Side. It came from a storefront smokehouse where a butcher from Indianola, Mississippi would slow simmer pig ears and season the broth for 4 hours, slice them thin, and pile them on 2 pieces of white bread with hot sauce, mustard, and a slice of raw white onion. The ear kept a soft, gelatinous crunch that felt like cartilage singing between your teeth. It cost 35 cents in 1963 and came wrapped in butcher paper you could carry in your coat pocket to work the second shift at Wisconsin Steel. The man who sold them wiped his hands on his apron and called every customer sir or ma'am. Now let me explain why this supper mattered beyond the taste. It was a sandwich that asked for no apology. It was a working class supper that nobody in the suburbs understood or wanted to understand. The white downtown papers would not print a recipe. The Chicago Defender did. And when the man behind the counter handed you that warm paper packet and said, Take care now, you knew you were seen. You were a man who had worked 12 hours and earned a hot supper on the walk home. Your grandmother back in Mississippi would have nodded if she had seen you eating it. That is what the pig ear sandwich was. It was a passport between two kitchens, one in Indianola and one in Bronzeville, stamped with pork fat and pride. Number 15, corned beef hash, a can of corned beef, 2 potatoes, an onion. That was the shopping list. You diced the potatoes and onion, fried them until they browned, crumbled in the corned beef, and pressed everything flat. The bottom crisped golden, while the inside stayed soft. A fried egg on top turned it into a meal that stuck with you until morning. During World War II, corned beef was a military ration that crossed into black households nationwide. By the 1970s, a can cost 49 cents and became a pantry staple for seniors who needed protein that did not spoil. A retired factory worker in Gary, Indiana, made corned beef hash every Saturday for 12 years after moving north during the migration. He said the meal traveled with him the way a hymn travels. You did not need to write it down. Your hands remembered. Wieners and rice and tomato sauce was what supper looked like on the nights when the grocery money had run out 3 days before payday, and she was working with what was in the back of the refrigerator, and nobody at the table was going to say a word about it because the alternative was clear to everyone old enough to understand arithmetic. The wieners, whatever brand was cheapest, sliced into coins about a 1/4 inch thick, went into a skillet with a little oil until they got some color on the flat sides, which made the difference between a dish that tasted like something and one that tasted like nothing. Ketchup went in next, thinned with a little water, salt and pepper, sometimes onion if there was one, simmered together until it thickened slightly and the wieners had absorbed some of the tomato. Over white rice. Every person who grew up eating this in the 1960s will swear their mother made it best, and they are all correct, and none of them will ever be able to fully explain why it tasted like that in that kitchen and not quite like that anywhere else. Liver and rice with onion gravy was the supper that divided the table cleanly between the people who understood it and the people who had to be convinced. Chicken livers or a slab of beef liver, sliced thin because thick liver goes tough and she didn't make anything tough, dredged in seasoned flour and laid into a skillet of hot oil, cooked fast for 3 minutes aside until the outside took color while the inside stayed just past pink. Removed and kept warm while thick rings of onion went into the same skillet, softened in the drippings. Then flour and broth stirred in and scraped until a gravy formed. The liver went back in. The whole thing was done in 15 minutes and served over white rice with the gravy poured across everything. Beef liver cost almost nothing per pound at the corner market in the 1960s, which is exactly why it appeared on so many weeknight tables, and exactly why it slipped off those tables as soon as the generation that stretched budgets passed on and left no one behind to defend it. Number 21, hot water cornbread. Cornmeal, salt, and boiling water. That was the entire recipe. A woman mixed it with her hands, shaped it into ovals, and fried them in a skillet of hot grease. The outside cracked when a man bit into it. The inside was dense and almost sweet. This was not the cornbread from a box mix. This was cornbread that predated the Civil War, passed through Reconstruction and 2 world wars without changing by a single ingredient. A working man might eat 6 of these with a bowl of greens and call it done. The mixed companies pushed their sweetened cake-like cornbread so hard that hot water cornbread disappeared from most kitchens. The women who knew how to shape it by feel are mostly gone now. Their hands knew the right temperature before any thermometer could. Here's something worth pausing for. None of these meals ever appeared in a cookbook, not one. The women who made them didn't write recipes down because there was nothing to write. A pinch, a handful, enough water to make it hold. They cooked from memory that reached back through their mothers and grandmothers to kitchens with no running water and no electric stove. The American food industry spent the 1970s and 1980s convincing families that convenience was the same thing as progress. Frozen dinners, boxed mixes, canned sauces with ingredient lists longer than a man's arm, and the suppers on this list, the ones that cost nothing and fed everyone, started disappearing. Not because they stopped tasting good, because the women who made them were told their cooking was backward, and the men who ate them were too tired to argue. What happened wasn't an accident, it was a replacement. Number 20, mudcat fried whole. A mudcat is a flathead catfish pulled from a creek or a drainage ditch, and in the Delta, they were free for anyone willing to sit on a bank with a cane pole and wait. The cook gutted it, scaled it, rolled it in seasoned cornmeal, and fried it whole in a cast iron skillet with the head still on. The wood stove held the grease at a steady temperature that no campfire could match, and that was the difference between a crisp fish and a greasy mess. Families ate around the bones, pulling the white meat off with their fingers. The head went to whoever wanted it, and somebody always did. A single large mudcat could feed a family of 6 if the cornbread held out, and the cornbread always held out. Number 17, fried canned corned beef. A can of corned beef turned out onto a cutting board, sliced thick and fried in a skillet until the outside crisped and the salty inside stayed soft. Corned beef was a government commodity food distributed to low-income families throughout the 1950s and 1960s through the Surplus Food Program. In Black households across the South and in great migration cities from Chicago to Philadelphia, it was fried crisp and served with white rice or pressed between 2 slices of white bread with mustard. The can cost pennies. The supper took 10 minutes from pantry to plate. When commodity food programs shifted away from canned goods and fresh meat programs took their place, the canned corned beef disappeared from pantries, and the skillet supper it anchored went with it. Number 14, fried catfish in cast iron. Big Mama soaked the fillets in buttermilk and hot sauce for an hour, then dredged each one through a plate of seasoned cornmeal, yellow and coarse, pressing the coating on with her fingers so it stuck tight. The cast iron skillet sat on the biggest burner with enough oil to come halfway up each fillet. When the oil shimmered and a pinch of cornmeal sizzled on contact, the fish went in, 3 minutes aside. The cornmeal turned dark gold and crunchy, and the catfish inside stayed white and flaky and tender. She pulled each fillet with a slotted spoon and laid them on a plate lined with a brown paper bag to drain. The whole house smelled like a fish fry for the rest of the night. Served with white bread, hot sauce, and a pile of coleslaw or a few slices of raw onion on the side, fried catfish was the Friday night supper that needed nothing from the oven. The skillet did all the work. 1 burner, 1 pan, and a stack of golden fillets that disappeared before they had time to cool. Big Mama fried catfish the same way every summer, and nobody ever suggested she change a thing. Number 11, black-eyed peas and hot links. New Year's Day in a senior's kitchen in Memphis ran on a 1-pound bag of camellia black-eyed peas at 59 cents and a pack of Earl Campbell hot links at $2. She soaked the peas overnight in a metal bowl, drained them in the morning, and dropped them into a pot with 6 cups of water, a chopped onion, 2 cloves of garlic, and the hot links sliced into thumb-sized rounds. She let it simmer 2 hours uncovered until the peas went soft and the broth turned deep red from the link grease. A spoon of crystal hot sauce at the end, a square of cornbread on the side. The peas were for luck. The links were for the people who needed something with bite. She had been cooking the same pot every January 1st since 1959. The peas had outlasted the husband, the move, and the cut to her check. They were still on your grandmother's table on January 1st, 1986, with the radio playing. Pig feet and sauerkraut brought together African American cooking traditions with influences from German immigrants throughout the South. Church mothers cleaned and split pig feet, then simmered them slowly until collagen broke down into gelatinous, silky texture. Sauerkraut was added during final hours, its tangy sharpness cutting through the richness of pork and creating unexpected balance. The finished dish was tender, slightly sour, deeply satisfying, served with cornbread to soak up flavorful liquid. It appeared at church suppers during winter months when heartier fare sustained the congregation through cold evenings. Though some modern palates might hesitate, those who grew up with pig feet and sauerkraut remember it fondly as a dish that filled bellies and connected communities across cultural lines.
Fried whiting fish brought coastal traditions inland to fellowship halls, providing affordable protein that could feed large crowds without expensive fish like snapper. Whole whiting were cleaned and scaled, then scored on both sides before being heavily seasoned with salt, pepper, cayenne, and garlic powder. The fish were dredged in seasoned cornmeal, creating crunchy golden coating when dropped into hot oil, with flesh inside staying white, flaky, and tender, while exterior turned crisp. Church fish fries became community events where men gathered around outdoor fryers while women prepared sides, with smell drawing neighbors from blocks away. Whiting was among cheapest fish available, with whole fish costing just pennies per pound and small bones that could be eaten when properly fried. The fish provided complete protein and essential fatty acids, making them nutritious choices that satisfied appetites. Children learned to navigate small bones expertly, picking meat clean and leaving behind perfect skeletons.
Number 10, liver and onions over rice. Calf liver cost about 29 cents a pound at the butcher on 47th Street in 1963, and it was the cheapest red meat a black woman could feed her children in a kitchenette with no refrigerator to speak of. A woman from Birmingham would slice it thin, dust it in seasoned flour, and sear it fast in bacon drippings in a hot cast iron skillet. She removed the liver to a plate, tossed 2 sliced yellow onions into the same skillet with salt and pepper, cooked them until they went soft and brown, then nestled the liver back in and spooned the pan gravy over. She served it over a mound of white rice with a side of green beans. Children refused it at first. Grandchildren begged for it 40 years later. That was how iron got into a growing girl's blood. That was how memory got written into Sunday. Number 19, egg and tomato skillet. This was the meal a Delta grandmother made when there was almost nothing left. A can of tomatoes poured into a hot skillet with onion and a pinch of sugar to cut the acid. When it started bubbling, she cracked 2 eggs right into the sauce and covered the skillet until the whites set. You scooped it onto toast or a hoe cake. A can of tomatoes cost 29 cents in 1980. Eggs cost 59 cents a dozen. The whole meal cost less than 15 cents. In the rural Black South, nobody called it anything fancy. They called it eggs and tomatoes. A retired cotton gin worker in Clarksdale made this 3 mornings a week and twice for supper. She said breakfast food for dinner was not laziness, it was freedom. You cooked what you wanted when the house was yours alone. The pinto bean pot was a Monday institution in African American households because Monday was wash day, the day the laundry needed tending from morning to dusk, and nothing on the stove could require constant attention. Dried pintos, soaked overnight, went into the pot first thing with a block of fatback rinsed to knock off some of the salt. The fatback rendered down over hours, its fat releasing slowly into the bean water and turning the whole pot silky in a way no seasoning packet could replicate. She'd set it on the back burner at the lowest heat and leave it alone until late afternoon, adding water once or twice when the level dropped. By supper time, the beans had absorbed everything the fatback had given, the pot liquor had gone thick and starchy, and the whole house smelled of something deep and slow and patient. Cornbread went into the cast iron around 4:30. Supper was on the table by 5, and nobody had to ask what was for dinner because they'd been smelling it since 9 in the morning. The Monday bean pot didn't need a recipe. It needed a whole day and the kind of patience that doesn't pass down easily anymore. Black-eyed peas and pigtails was the supper that arrived on the table with a history most people in that kitchen had stopped talking about out loud. Pigtails, the cut nobody counted when they divided up the animal, dropped into a pot of dried black-eyed peas that had soaked overnight with water to cover, a diced onion, and enough time on the stove to let the tails render their fat and their smoke into every bean in the pot. The peas went velvety. The broth went dark and rich. The pigtail meat pulled away from the bone in bits too small to serve alone, but too flavorful to waste. This combination of beans and preserved pork reached back centuries before American kitchens. West African foodways had been pairing legumes with smoked or salted pork for generations, and the black-eyed pea itself traveled from West Africa to the Americas through the slave trade, landing first in the Caribbean before taking root in the South. You didn't make it just on New Year's. You made it when the week required something that stuck. Number 16, fried fatback and greens. Fatback is exactly what it sounds like. A thick strip of pure pork fat cut from the back of the hog with no meat on it at all. Sliced thin, fried until the pieces curled and turned brown, served alongside a pot of collard or turnip greens that had been cooking with a smoked ham hock since noon. The fried fatback added salt and crunch. The greens added everything else. A working man in the Mississippi Delta or the factory neighborhoods of Gary, Indiana, ate this 2 or 3 times a week without thinking about it. Fatback cost next to nothing. The leftover cut that hog farmers practically gave away. When doctors started calling animal fat the enemy of the heart, fatback was the first casualty. It didn't fade, it was sentenced. Number 13, fried green tomatoes. Green tomatoes showed up in the kitchen when the vines had more fruit than they could ripen before the first cold snap. The cook sliced them thick, dredged each slice in cornmeal, and fried them in hot lard on the wood stove until the coating turned a dark gold and the tomato inside went soft and tart. The sourness of an unripe tomato against the crunch of fried cornmeal was a combination that worked so well nobody questioned it. Fried green tomatoes were served alongside beans, rice, or whatever else was already on the plate, and they disappeared faster than anything that required an hour of cooking. The cook who timed them right, pulling each slice from the skillet the moment the cornmeal darkened but before the tomato collapsed, had a plate that looked like it came from somewhere finer than a shotgun house at the end of a gravel road. Number 16, fried chicken feet, cleaned down to the bone, boiled until tender, then dredged in seasoned flour and fried in a skillet until the skin turned crisp and pulled tight. The meat was scarce, but the flavor was concentrated, and the gelatin in the joints made the whole thing slick and satisfying in a way that meatier cuts could not match. Chicken feet were free. When a family slaughtered a yard bird, the feet were the part nobody else wanted, and that made them available to the people who could not afford to be choosy. Children ate them like finger food, pulling the tiny bones apart with their teeth. Adults served them over rice with gravy made from the frying fat. Supermarket chickens today come without feet. The processing plants removed them on the line and shipped them overseas by the ton. The feet left black kitchens when they left the bird. Number 22, sardines and crackers with hot sauce. Big Mama pulled a flat tin from the pantry shelf, peeled back the lid, and set it on the table next to a sleeve of saltines and a bottle of Louisiana hot sauce. No stove, no skillet, no heat of any kind. The sardines were salty and oily, packed with enough flavor to stand alone. She laid one across a cracker, hit it with a shake of hot sauce, and ate it, standing at the counter while the children assembled their own plates. A tin kept in the pantry for months without spoiling. On the worst nights in August, when the air pressed heavy and still and nobody wanted to move, sardines and crackers solved the problem without asking a single thing of the kitchen. Number 14, hoe cakes and Johnny cakes. 2 ingredients, white cornmeal and boiling water. A pinch of salt if the cupboard was generous. A retired sleeping car porter in Southside Chicago mixed a cup of Aunt Jemima cornmeal with a cup of boiling water until the batter held together like wet sand, dropped it by the spoonful into a hot iron skillet greased with bacon fat, and pressed each cake flat with the back of the spoon. 3 minutes aside, the edges crisped, the middles stayed soft. He ate 4 hoe cakes with a smear of margarine and a cup of pot liquor from the greens pot. The whole supper cost about 14 cents. Your great-great-grandmother had cooked the same hoe cakes on a flat hoe over a fire in Mississippi in 1898. The hoe was gone, the recipe was not. A senior with 2 ingredients and 1 skillet was never out of supper. The math was older than you. Smothered cabbage with ham hocks turned simple ingredients into something the entire congregation looked forward to all week. Church mothers simmered ham hocks until meat became tender and broth turned rich with smoky flavor. Cabbage was added in wedges, cooking down slowly until it absorbed pork essence while maintaining slight bite. Seasoned with black pepper, sugar to balance bitterness, and sometimes red pepper flakes, the dish was humble yet satisfying. Served alongside cornbread at Wednesday night. Suppers, smothered cabbage, provided nutrition and comfort while stretching modest ingredients. The dish represented generations of knowledge about coaxing maximum flavor from minimal resources. Though cabbage remains common, this slow-cooked preparation has largely disappeared, replaced by quicker methods.
Gula red rice with sausage carried Carolina Low Country traditions into fellowship halls, a dish with roots in West African jollof rice seasoned through generations. Long grain rice was sautéed in bacon drippings with onions, bell peppers, and garlic before crushed tomatoes transformed the mixture into something rich and red, with smoked sausage adding protein. The rice absorbed every bit of flavor as it simmered, turning tender with each grain coated in tomato-rich seasoning. Churchwomen from coastal regions brought this proudly, knowing it represented cultural heritage connecting congregations to ancestors who never forgot their origins. Rice was inexpensive and fed dozens when stretched with vegetables and meat, making it practical for church budgets. The tomatoes added vitamins while sausage provided richness to satisfy working people arriving hungry. Gula red rice appeared at Wednesday suppers and Sunday dinners, signaling someone understood honoring traditions while feeding community.
Number 15, hot link sandwich on mother's bread. The hot link came up from the Mississippi Delta and found its second home on Maxwell Street and Halstead in the early 1960s. A vendor on a folding table outside the old market, a man who had walked out of Yazoo City in 1957, would grill thick pork and beef links over charcoal until the casing split and the grease hissed into the fire. He laid 2 links on a buttered slice of mother's bread, a cheap, soft white loaf baked in a factory on the west side, added grilled onions and a swirl of yellow mustard, and folded it over. He sold it for $0.25. You ate it standing on the curb while a blues guitar player cried across the street. It was greasy, smoky, spicy, and it was breakfast after a Saturday night that had gone on too long. That sandwich was a full autobiography in one bite. Number 22, country fried steak with onion gravy. A cheap cut of round steak, pounded thin with the back of a skillet until it was tender enough to chew without good teeth. Seasoned, dredged in flour, fried in cast iron until golden. Then the steak came out and the gravy went in. Flour into the drippings, milk added slowly, onions softened until they disappeared into the sauce. Everything went back in, covered, and simmered. In 1990, a pound of round steak cost $1.89 on sale. A senior could cut 2 portions and freeze the second for later. The gravy stretched the meat, the onions stretched the gravy, and the whole meal, eaten with a slice of bread to soak up the drippings, cost less than $1. Black families in Texas and Oklahoma called this chicken fried steak without the chicken. It was Sunday night's quiet reward. Salt pork and white beans drew a line between people who grew up eating it and people who didn't, because salt pork and fatback might look similar at the butcher counter, but they weren't the same, and she knew the difference. Salt pork was dry rubbed and cured longer, denser, and more intensely flavored, with actual meat running through it alongside the fat. She'd cut it into thick slabs and render it in the pot first, letting the fat melt out slowly before the soaked Great Northern beans went in. That rendered fat became the cooking medium and the flavor base at once, giving the finished pot a richness different from ham hock, more concentrated, slightly harder. The beans needed nothing beyond salt, pepper, and thyme, and the dish was ready when the broth had gone thick enough to coat the back of a spoon. A splash of cider vinegar over the top at the table cut through the fat and opened everything up. It was the one detail only someone who sat at the right table would know to tell you. She knew. She always knew. And now that table is gone. Number 18, salt meat and cabbage. Salt pork was the original American preserved meat, and in the 1970s, it was still cheap enough that a woman could buy a slab for less than $1 and cook it with a head of cabbage to feed the whole family. The salt pork went into the pot first, simmering for an hour until the fat rendered, and the water turned into a rich, salty broth. Then the cabbage went in, quartered, and cooked until it was soft enough to cut with a spoon, somewhere between a soup and a stew, served in deep bowls with cornbread to soak up the liquid. This was a Wednesday night supper, what a family ate in the middle of the week when the weekend groceries were running low and payday was still 2 days out. It required patience and almost no money, and it tasted better than it had any right to. The prepackaged deli meats and boneless cuts that filled stores in the 1990s pushed salt pork off the shelf entirely. Number 11, smothered chicken with drop dumplings. When the preacher announced he was coming to Sunday supper, a chicken died. The cook killed it in the yard, plucked it over a pot of boiling water, cut it into pieces, and smothered it in a cast iron Dutch oven on the wood stove with onion, salt, pepper, and just enough water to make a thick gravy. When the chicken was nearly done, the cook dropped spoonfuls of a simple flour and water dough into the bubbling liquid, put the heavy lid on, and did not touch it for 15 minutes. The dumplings steamed on top of the gravy and came out pillowy and soaked through with chicken flavor. This was the meal that proved a household could feed an honored guest without shame, and the pressure to get it right was enormous. A dry dumpling or a tough bird meant something had gone wrong that no amount of sweet tea on the porch could fix. The wood stove had to hold a medium heat for the smothering and then drop to a gentle simmer for the dumplings. And making that shift without a knob meant pulling a log out of the firebox at exactly the right moment. Too much fire and the bottom scorched. Too little and the dumplings turned gummy. The cook who pulled this off with no thermostat, no timer, and no second chance, had earned a reputation in the community that lasted longer than the preacher's sermon. Children were told to stay out of the kitchen entirely while the dumplings were steaming, because opening the door let in a draft that could flatten them. The next morning, whatever was left went back into the pot on low heat, and the dumplings tasted even better because they had been sitting in that gravy all night long. This was the dish that separated the cooks who understood fire from the people who just heated things up, and everyone at the table knew the difference before the first bite. Number 22, brains and eggs. Pork brains scrambled with eggs in a cast iron skillet. This was common across the rural Black South from Reconstruction through the 1970s. The brains came from the hog killing, soft and pale, soaked in salt water overnight, and then crumbled into beaten eggs the next morning or at supper time. The texture was creamy, almost custard-like, and the taste was mild enough that children ate it without knowing what it was. Most of them found out years later and wished they had not asked. The United States Department of Agriculture started issuing cholesterol warnings in the 1980s. A single serving of pork brains contained over 1,100% of the recommended daily intake. The dish did not survive that number. Rose brand canned pork brains stayed on store shelves in the Deep South into the 2000s, but hardly anybody was buying them. Number 16, ham salad sandwich. Leftover ham from Sunday dinner got chopped fine by hand, mixed with mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, a little mustard, and diced celery. Spread cold on white bread, it was supper for Monday and Tuesday without touching the stove again. Big Mama stretched one Sunday ham across half a week this way, and nobody at the table felt like they were eating the same meal twice. The salad sat in the icebox in a covered bowl, getting better as the flavors settled in. Children ate it without knowing they were eating leftovers because the transformation from Sunday roast to Tuesday sandwich was complete. This was the logic of a kitchen where nothing got wasted and every meal was already planned 2 days ahead. Number 25, pan-fried catfish with cornmeal crust. A grandmother in Greenville, Mississippi, kept a brown paper bag of Aunt Jemima cornmeal mix on the back of the stove and a jar of bacon grease beside it. Catfish nuggets, the small cuts the fish house could not sell whole, ran 69 cents a pound at the corner market in 1983. She salted them, peppered them, dropped them into the bag, shook it twice, and laid them in a hot iron skillet with 2 spoons of grease, 4 minutes aside. The cornmeal crust crackled when she lifted them out. She set them on a folded grocery sack to drain and put a slice of Wonder Bread under each one to catch the oil. A glass of sweet tea on your side of the table. The plate cost her about 80 cents. The dignity was free. Your grandmother called it Friday and you ate 2 pieces. Red rice carried Gullah Geechee tradition directly into African American church fellowship halls throughout the coastal South. Church mothers prepared it by cooking long grain rice with tomatoes, bacon drippings, onions, and spices until each grain turned that distinctive reddish hue. Tomatoes broke down during cooking, infusing rice with tangy sweetness while bacon fat added richness. Some versions included smoked sausage, making the dish heartier for special occasions. Red rice appeared at church homecomings and reunions where large crowds needed feeding. It was cousin to West African jollof rice, linking church tables to ancestral homelands across the Atlantic. Though still prepared in some low-country churches, red rice has faded from fellowship halls further inland, leaving only memories of those who tasted history. Time equals 1 second greater.
Black-eyed peas with ham hocks simmered in church kitchens year-round but held special significance on New Year's Day. when congregations gathered to eat them for luck and prosperity. Dried peas were soaked overnight, then cooked slowly with a single ham hock that released smoky, salty flavor, while onions and garlic added depth. The result was creamy beans in thick pot liquor served as soup or over rice, with ham hock's meat pulled from bone. Churchwomen understood a little meat went far when combined with beans, providing protein without the expense of steaks beyond most budgets. Black-eyed peas cost almost nothing, with dried bags available for pennies, perfect for feeding large crowds after Sunday service. The dish carried deep cultural significance, connecting congregations to Southern agricultural traditions and New Year's customs promising good fortune. Children ate them without complaint because pot liquor's richness made beans taste special, while adults appreciated both nutrition and continuity with tradition.
Number 13, collard greens with ham hock. A grandmother from Selma, Alabama, living in a third-floor kitchenette on 45th and Drexel, bought a bunch of collards for 15 cents on a Saturday in 1962. She washed them in the bathtub because her sink was too small, stripped the stems, and tore the leaves into strips the size of her palm. One smoked ham hock from the corner store cost 39 cents. She simmered them, together with a whole onion, garlic, red pepper, vinegar, and a pinch of sugar in a borrowed stock pot on a neighbor's stove. 4 hours later, the greens were silky, smoky, and glowing green. She ladled them into plastic containers and sent one across the hall to the widow. The pot liquor was medicine. Her grandchildren drank it warm from a coffee mug. It is powerful how a plate of greens could carry a whole dynasty of cooks on its steam. Number 13, skillet greens with smoked neck. Collard greens did not always need a big pot and 4 hours. A senior could strip the leaves, roll them tight, and slice them into ribbons. A smoked turkey neck went into the skillet first with water until the meat loosened. Then the greens went in, pressed down, covered, and steamed for 20 minutes. A bunch of collards cost 50 cents in 1990. A neck cost 39 cents. The meal fed a senior for 2 days. In the Black Belt of Alabama, greens were more than food. They were culture. Tuskegee University research found greens were among the most eaten vegetables for older Black adults in the region. A retired teacher in Tuskegee made skillet greens every Monday because her mother had made greens on Mondays and her mother's mother before that. The recipe changed. The day never did. Turkey wings braised with onions and celery was the supper that proved she could take almost any cut and pull something worth remembering from it. Turkey wings became a regular in African American kitchens through the 1960s as national production expanded following the post-war years. They were meaty, inexpensive, and far more forgiving than chicken. She'd season them hard, dust them in flour, and brown them in a Dutch oven until the skin was deep gold. In went rough-cut onions and celery, leaves included, never discarded, along with enough water to come halfway up the wings, a bay leaf, and black pepper. The lid went on low for an hour and a half, sometimes 2, until the meat had loosened from the joint and the broth had gone glossy with collagen. Some nights potatoes went in during the last half hour. Some nights it was just wings and broth poured over rice. Either way, what came out of that pot was more than anyone expected from a cut that used to be the part everyone passed over. Stewed neck bones and potatoes asked for almost nothing in the way of ingredients and delivered everything in the way of flavor. Pork neck bones, the cut the butcher once practically gave away, seasoned with salt, pepper, garlic, and a pinch of cayenne, browned in a Dutch oven until the exposed meat took color, then covered with water and a diced onion and left to simmer for 30 minutes until the bones began releasing their collagen into the broth. cubed potatoes went in the last 15 minutes, soaking up the pork-rich liquid until they turned soft and silky and tasted of nothing that grew in the ground and everything that came from the pot. What the bones left behind wasn't just broth, it was a gelatinous, deeply flavored liquid that thickened as it cooled, and the neck bones themselves gave up their meat at the touch of a fork, falling in threads so tender you forgot the cut had once been considered waste. Number 22, neck bones and rice. This was a proper supper, and the women who made it treated it with seriousness the name didn't deserve. Pork neck bones, the cheapest cut at the butcher counter, slow cooked for 3 hours until the meat pulled away from the bone with a nudge. The broth thickened into a gravy that soaked through a mound of white rice. A pot of this fed 4 people for under $1. In the black neighborhoods of Memphis and Houston, neck bones were what a woman put on the stove in the morning before she left for her own job, so it would be ready when her husband walked through the door. The bone marrow flavored everything it touched. Butcher shops used to practically give these away. Today, they sit behind grocery store glass at specialty prices. Nobody in 1974 called a neck bone artisanal. They called it Tuesday. Number 17, stewed rabbit with wild onions. Rabbit was not exotic in the Delta. It was pest control that happened to taste good. A boy brought one home from the field. The cook skinned it, cut it into pieces, and put it in a heavy pot on the wood stove with water, whatever wild onions grew along the field edge, a little salt and black pepper. That pot stayed on the back of the stove for hours while the meat fell apart into the broth. The wild onions gave it a sharpness that cultivated onions never matched. Rabbit stew stretched further than any cut of pork because the broth itself was the meal. Pour it over rice or sop it with cornbread, and a single rabbit fed a table of 8. Number 3, fried apples. Sliced tart apples laid into a skillet with butter, white sugar, and a heavy dusting of cinnamon, cooked on medium heat until the slices went soft and the juice reduced into a thick caramel glaze. In the Appalachian foothills and across the Piedmont, where black communities and white communities shared the same orchards and the same hard times, fried apples were a supper course, not a dessert. Eaten with cornbread or biscuits, they were the main dish when the fruit was in season and there was nothing else to put on the table. Fall was fried apple season. The smell of cinnamon and browning butter carried through the screen door and out into the yard. Local orchards gave way to housing developments. Apples became supermarket imports shipped in from Washington State. The skillet version disappeared with the trees that made it possible. Number 15, stovetop macaroni and cheese, not the baked kind with the breadcrumb crust. Big Mama boiled the elbow macaroni in salted water, drained it, and put the pot right back on the burner with a chunk of butter, a pour of milk, and as much sharp cheddar as the pot could hold. She stirred it on low heat until the cheese melted through and coated every noodle in a thick, glossy sauce. Salt, pepper, a shake of paprika on top. It came together in one pot in the time it took someone to set the table. On summer evenings, when turning on the oven would have pushed the kitchen past the point of mercy, stovetop macaroni and cheese was the answer that nobody argued with. The children asked for seconds. The pot was empty before the dishes were done. Number 8, chicken and dumplings, the cheap parts version. Chicken backs ran 29 cents a pound at the meat counter in Memphis in 1984. A grandmother dropped 1.5 pounds into a heavy pot with 8 cups of water, a chopped onion, 2 stalks of celery, 3 peppercorns, and a bay leaf. She simmered it 90 minutes, pulled the bones out, picked the meat off, and strained the broth back into the pot. Then she made the dumplings. 2 cups of self-rising flour, a 1/4 cup of Crisco, and enough buttermilk to bring it into a shaggy ball. She rolled it thin on the counter, cut it into ragged squares with a butter knife, and dropped the squares into the simmering broth one by one. 20 minutes covered. The dumplings puffed up tender and pale. She ladled it into a bowl with a scoop of the picked chicken meat. The whole pot ran her about 80 cents and fed her 3 suppers. Your grandmother had made it the same way in 1949 when grief sat at her table. Sweet potato souffle brought elegance to church fellowship tables, transforming humble tubers into something resembling dessert. Church mothers baked sweet potatoes until soft, then mashed them with butter, brown sugar, eggs, vanilla, and warm spices like cinnamon and nutmeg. The mixture was spread into baking dishes and topped with crunchy layer of pecans, brown sugar, and butter that caramelized during baking. The finished souffle emerged golden and fragrant, fluffy interior giving way to addictive, crunchy topping. It appeared at Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter gatherings where members brought their finest dishes. Sweet potato souffle straddled the line between side dish and dessert. The dish represented elevating affordable ingredients into something memorable, though it faded as convenience foods replaced scratch preparations.
Corn pudding casserole arrived at church suppers in deep baking dishes. Its golden top, slightly browned and custard-like interior, sweet from fresh corn enriched with eggs and milk. Fresh corn kernels were cut from cobs and mixed with eggs, evaporated milk, butter, sugar, flour, and sometimes nutmeg before being poured into buttered dishes and baked slowly. The result was somewhere between pudding and cornbread, with tender corn suspended in creamy custard that held together when spooned. Churchwomen made corn pudding during summer when corn was abundant and cheap, often receiving bags from families with garden surplus. The dish stretched corn into something substantial that could serve as both vegetable and starch, filling stomachs efficiently. Children loved corn pudding because it tasted slightly sweet, while adults appreciated how it used seasonal abundance while creating something celebratory. Corn pudding proved that church cooks understood transforming simple ingredients into dishes, satisfying both hunger and soul.
Number 22, souse with saltines. Souse was the jellied meatloaf your grandmother made out of pig trotters, ears, and snout, and it lived in the icebox on the top shelf wrapped in wax paper. A woman on Indiana Avenue, born in Selma, would boil the parts with vinegar, red pepper flakes, bay leaf, and a whole onion for 5 hours, pick the meat off the bones, and pour the spice broth over it in a loaf pan. By morning, it had set into a cold, savory jelly. She sliced it thin and laid it on saltine crackers with a dab of yellow mustard. It was breakfast, lunch, or a supper eaten standing up before a night shift at the stockyards. A pound of souse cost about 15 cents to make and fed a grown man for 3 days. It is easy to forget that food like this was survival engineering handed down through generations. Number 18, smothered turkey wings. Turkey wings were the cheapest part of the bird, often less than 69 cents a pound. A senior would season them heavy with garlic powder, onion powder, salt, and pepper. Brown them in a skillet until the skin crisped. Then pull them out, make a roux in the drippings with flour and butter, add water and onions, and put the wings back in. Covered and simmered for 90 minutes, the meat turned tender and the gravy turned thick and dark. Served over white rice, this tasted like it cost 10 times what it did. A retired postal worker in Jackson, Mississippi, named Thelma Reese, made smothered turkey wings every other Wednesday for 11 years after her husband died in 1979. She had one cast iron skillet her mother-in-law had given her in 1955. That skillet had cooked the wedding supper. It had fried fish for every church picnic. And now it fed one woman eating alone at a table that used to seat 8. Thelma did not cook because she was hungry. She cooked because the act of standing at her stove was the one thing nobody could take from her. The skillet was not just a pan. It was the last piece of her marriage that still worked every day. For a generation of black women who spent their lives cooking for others, the hardest meal to make was the one for themselves alone. The turkey wings were cheap, the rice was cheap, but the dignity of sitting down to a proper supper in a quiet kitchen, that was worth more than everything in the grocery store combined. Pig feet and potato stew turned something the butcher sold for almost nothing into a pot so gelatinous and rich it coated the inside of the bowl. She'd get the feet pickled, vinegar brined at the local meat market, kept in jars behind the counter alongside the souse and the salt pork, rinse them well, and set them to boil. That first boil got poured off, and the pot refilled with fresh water, which was the step most people skipped and the reason most people's pig feet never tasted right. Onion, black pepper, a bay leaf, back on low heat for 2 hours until the skin had gone soft and the broth had turned thick and glossy from the collagen releasing out of the bone. Potatoes went in for the last 45 minutes, served with cornbread to sop the broth. Sardines and hot rice was the supper that fed a family when the week had nothing left. A flat tin of sardines in tomato sauce, not oil, always tomato sauce, because the sauce was part of the dish, stirred directly into just cooked white rice with diced onion and a shake of hot sauce, heated 3 minutes until the fish broke apart into the grains. Done before the rice cooled. Canned sardines cost almost nothing, required no refrigeration, and delivered more protein per penny than nearly any other item on the grocery shelf, which is exactly why this Great Depression staple followed black families north through the Great Migration without losing a step. Some households added a sliced hard-boiled egg on top. She added pepper and a prayer of thanks and called it ready. The kids ate every grain. Number 17, pig feet. A pot of pig feet on the stove was a signal. It meant supper was going to take a while, and when it was ready, a man needed to eat with his hands. Pig feet were braised for hours, sometimes with vinegar and red pepper flakes, sometimes with just salt and an onion. The skin turned gelatinous. The meat, what little there was, clung to small bones and required work to get at. It was not elegant food, it was labor food that demanded labor to eat. In the 1970s, pig feet cost almost nothing because nobody outside of black and rural white communities wanted them. A butcher would sell a package of 4 for less than the price of a can of beans. The men who ate them grew up watching their fathers eat them, and their fathers before that. It was generational. When the generation broke, the tradition broke with it. Younger families looked at pig feet and saw something they didn't recognize as food. Number 14, Polk County burgoo. Burgoo in the Delta was not the horse country version from Kentucky with 10 meats and a brass trophy. It was a survival pot. The cook put whatever game and whatever vegetables were available into the biggest pot the stove could hold and let it simmer from morning until the last person came in from the field. Squirrel, possum, sweet potato, field corn, cut off the cob, a handful of dried beans soaked overnight. It all went in together. The wood stove gave burgoo what no gas range could replicate. The temperature dropped slowly as the fire died down overnight, and by morning, the liquid had thickened into something that held a spoon upright. Every pot was different. 2 houses on the same dirt road made burgoo the same week, and neither tasted like the other, because whatever walked out of the woods or grew near the fence that week determined the flavor. Nobody agreed on the right way to make it. Everybody agreed there was no wrong way. That contradiction held the whole dish together. The cook stirred the pot once in the morning and once at noon, and otherwise left it alone because burgoo punished anyone who fussed with it. Lifting the lid too often let the steam escape and thinned the broth. Stirring too hard broke the meat into threads instead of letting it hold its shape long enough to fall apart on its own terms. Patience was the only seasoning that every burgoo pot had in common. The word itself came from somewhere nobody could trace, and the dish followed the same rule. It belonged to no single recipe, no single family, no single county. It belonged to the pot and whoever was hungry enough to stand over it. Number 20, skillet crowder peas with ham hock. Crowder peas, darker and earthier than their black-eyed cousins, simmered in a heavy pot with a smoked ham hock and onion and water to cover. Big Mama started the pot in the late morning and let it go on low heat through the afternoon. By supper time, the peas had turned thick and creamy. The ham hock had given up its meat and its smoke into the broth, and the whole house smelled like something that took all day because it did. A bowl of crowder peas over rice with a piece of cornbread on the side was a full meal that asked for nothing else. The peas came dried from the store or fresh from the garden, and either way, they stretched a single ham hock into 2 or 3 nights of supper without complaint. Number 22, tuna and rice casserole. A retired bus driver in Cleveland kept his pantry to 7 items by the middle of the month: 2 cans of chicken of the sea, a box of minute rice, a can of Campbell's cream of mushroom, a sleeve of saltines, evaporated milk, an onion, and a brick of government cheese. He chopped the onion, browned it in margarine, stirred in the rice, the soup, the milk, and a splash of water, then folded in the drained tuna and a handful of crumbled saltines. He grated the government cheese over the top and baked it covered for 30 minutes. The casserole came out hot and binding and quiet. It fed him for 3 nights. The pan went into the sink and stayed there until morning. If you ever lived alone, you know that the dishes wait. He had stopped washing them after dark when he stopped having a wife to tell about his day. Pig ear sandwiches appeared at African American church barbecues and outdoor gatherings, turning a cut most people discarded into something unexpectedly delicious. The ears were cleaned thoroughly, simmered until tender, then sliced thin and either pickled or grilled until crispy at edges. Piled onto soft white bread with hot sauce, mustard, or vinegar slaw, the sandwiches offered chewy yet tender texture, with mild pork flavor absorbing whatever seasonings were applied. Church cooks who prepared pig ears honored no-waste traditions, sustaining African American communities through generations. The sandwiches appeared at summer revivals and picnics. For those who grew up eating them, pig ear sandwiches carried memories of hot summer days and crowded church grounds, a reminder that church cooking found value in what others overlooked.
Lima beans with butter and bacon transformed what some children considered boring vegetables into something rich through proper seasoning and pork. Dried lima beans were soaked overnight, then cooked slowly with bacon pieces, onions, garlic, and bay leaves until beans became creamy and tender. Butter was stirred in at the end, adding richness and glossy finish. The result was substantial enough to serve as main dish or hearty side, with bacon providing smoky depth and butter adding luxurious mouthfeel. Lima beans were inexpensive, with dried bags costing pennies and yielding enormous quantities when cooked. The beans provided complete protein when combined with cornbread, making them nutritionally valuable and economical. Church women made large pots that fed dozens, knowing beans would be popular with both adults and children who appreciated bacon flavor. The dish appeared regularly at Wednesday suppers, proving simple ingredients properly prepared could create something genuinely beloved.
Number 25, Sunday fried chicken with cornbread. This was the meal that said, the week is over, the rent is paid, and we are still here. A woman on East 43rd Street would buy a whole fryer on Saturday afternoon at the Walgreens butcher counter for about 89 cents a pound. She cut it into 8 pieces, soaked them in buttermilk overnight in a jelly jar, and dredged each piece in flour seasoned with salt, black pepper, and a little paprika for color. Then she fried the chicken in a heavy cast iron skillet in a 1/4 inch of lard, turning each piece only once. The cornbread baked in the same oven in a greased iron pan that had belonged to her mother in Yazoo City, Mississippi. She served it with a pitcher of sweet tea and a bowl of hot sauce on the side. Her grandchildren would remember the smell of that kitchen for the rest of their lives. The thing is, this was not a meal. This was a promise kept on a tablecloth. Number 11, skillet mac and cheese. This was not the baked version with 3 cheeses and a breadcrumb topping. This was the Tuesday night version, a grandmother made when the oven felt like too much effort. Elbow macaroni boiled in the skillet with just enough water to cook the pasta. When the water was gone, you stirred in butter, milk, and as much sharp cheddar as you could afford, grated straight into the pan. The cheese melted and the milk thickened into a sauce that clung to every noodle. James Hemings, an enslaved man trained as a chef in France, is credited with introducing macaroni and cheese to American tables. 200 years later, a box of elbows cost 39 cents and store-brand cheddar cost 99 cents. For a senior living alone, skillet mac and cheese was the fastest path from an empty stomach to a warm one. It did not require a recipe. It did not require measuring. It only required a skillet, cheese, and the willingness to sit down and eat. That sounds simple. For a person eating alone in a quiet kitchen, sitting down was the hardest part. The cooking was easy, the silence was not. A retired bus driver in Detroit ate the whole skillet every Thursday for 7 years. He said washing one pan was better than washing a pan and a plate. He was not being lazy, he was being honest. When you cook for one, every dish you wash reminds you there's only one setting at the table. Skillet mac and cheese understood that. It met a man where he was. It asked nothing except that he pick up a fork. That was enough. Smothered chicken and rice was the supper that could silence a table full of hungry people in 30 seconds. She'd cut the chicken herself, seasoned every surface hard with salt, black pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, dredge each piece in flour, and set it in hot lard until the skin turned a deep, crackling gold. When the chicken came out, every brown bit and rendered drop of fat stayed in the skillet. Sliced onions went in, stirred and scraped until they softened and picked up all that color from the bottom of the pan. Water went in next, the flour from the dredging thickening it as it simmered. And then the chicken went back in with the lid on low for 45 minutes until the meat had pulled from the bone and the gravy had gone deep brown and rich. Over long grain white rice, it was a supper that cost almost nothing and tasted like it cost everything. The last person who made it exactly right has been gone a long time. That gravy has never been quite the same since, no matter how many times someone tries. Potted chicken with rice meant bone-in chicken pieces, thighs and drumsticks, never breast, because breast meat goes dry and she didn't raise anyone who wasted money on dry chicken. Seasoned with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, browned in a little oil until the skin went gold, then set aside while diced onion and bell pepper softened in the same pot. The rice went in dry, stirred once in the drippings to coat every grain, then the chicken went back on top and just enough water or broth poured over to cover. The lid went on, the heat dropped. 8 minutes in and the kitchen smelled like Sunday. She learned this method from her own mother, who had learned it in a kitchen where measuring cups didn't exist and the only instruction was to watch until it looked right. Nobody in that house asked what was for supper twice. That pot answered every question before you finished asking it. Number 19, liver and onions. This is the dish that split black households right down the middle. A man either loved it or he pushed the plate away and went to bed hungry. There was no middle ground with liver. Beef liver, sliced thin, dredged in flour with salt and pepper, then fried in a hot skillet with enough oil to make the edges crisp. The onions went in the same pan after, sliced into rings, cooked until they went soft and sweet, served with rice or mashed potatoes and whatever green vegetable was in the house that week. The smell filled every room. It was impossible to hide the fact that liver was being cooked. In the 1970s, a pound of beef liver in most southern cities cost less than 40 cents. It was dense with iron and protein, and doctors used to recommend it for men who worked physical jobs because it built blood and stamina. In the steel towns of Birmingham and Pittsburgh, in the auto plants of Detroit, and in the meatpacking houses of Chicago, liver was what a working man's wife put on the table when she wanted to keep him standing through another week. The taste was strong, metallic almost. Some women soaked the liver in buttermilk overnight to pull the bitterness out, a trick passed from mother to daughter that no recipe book ever documented. By the 1980s, cholesterol warnings turned liver into something people avoided on purpose. Health columns in newspapers told families to cut it from their diet. The men who had eaten it 3 times a month stopped asking for it, and their sons never learned to eat it at all. Today, beef liver sits in grocery store cases marked down to clearance, and almost nobody reaches for it. The cheapest cut in the store, loaded with more iron and B vitamins than any supplement on the shelf, and an entire generation was scared away from it by a newspaper column. Number 22, guinea hen stewed with rice. Guinea fowl ran loose in Delta yards and screamed whenever a stranger came up the road, better than any watchdog and tougher than any chicken. The cook cut the bird into pieces, browned them in lard, and covered them with water, onion, and salt. The pot sat on the back of the stove for most of the afternoon because guinea meat needed time to give up its stubbornness. The broth turned dark and rich, with a flavor sharper and wilder than yard chicken. When the meat finally pulled from the bone, the cook spooned it over rice and ladled the broth on top. Guinea hen was not a fancy meal. It was what happened when one of those noisy birds stopped laying and the cook decided the yard could afford to be a little quieter. Number 18, fried sweet potatoes, not baked, not candied, not whipped into a casserole with marshmallows on top, peeled, sliced into rounds about 1/4 inch thick, and fried in a cast iron skillet with lard until the natural sugars caramelized and the edges went dark and crisp. Some cooks dusted them with a little brown sugar and cinnamon. Others left them completely plain because the sweetness of the potato was enough on its own. Sweet potatoes grew wild across the South and were one of the cheapest crops a family could raise in a small garden plot. As a skillet supper, they were filling, fast, and required nothing but the potato and the fat to cook it in. Canned sweet potatoes and frozen fries replaced them in the 1980s. The fresh ones still grow, but the idea of frying them plain in a skillet for supper has all but vanished. Number 19, fried liver and onions. Beef liver from the butcher counter, sitting in the case next to cuts that cost several times more. Big Mama soaked the slices in buttermilk for an hour to pull the bitterness, dredged each piece through seasoned flour, and laid them into a smoking cast iron skillet with a generous pour of oil. The liver fried fast, 2 minutes aside, maybe less. Overcooked liver turned, tough and chalky, and Big Mama pulled it at the exact moment the outside crisped and the center still held color. She set the slices on a plate and dropped thick rings of onion into the same skillet. The onions softened in the drippings and went golden and sweet. A spoonful of flour into the pan, then water stirred slow to build a dark gravy from the fond stuck to the iron. The liver went back in just long enough to coat, and the whole skillet came to the table over white rice. Children were divided. Some refused it outright. Others ate without complaint because the onion gravy made everything taste good, and the crust gave it a texture that disguised what was underneath. Liver was one of the most nourishing cuts at the counter, and it cost a fraction of what steak or chops demanded. On a Wednesday night in July, fried liver and onions fed the family from one skillet and one burner. Big Mama served it with rice and sliced tomatoes, and the meal finished before the kitchen had time to heat up. Number 23, syrup biscuits for breakfast as supper. A widow in Birmingham mixed 2 cups of self-rising flour, a quarter cup of Crisco, and enough buttermilk to bring it together. She rolled the dough out on a square of waxed paper, cut biscuits with the rim of a Welch's jelly jar, and slid the pan into a 425 oven. 12 minutes. While they baked, she warmed Cairo dark syrup in a small saucepan with a knob of margarine until it was thin enough to pour. She split each hot biscuit, drizzled the syrup, and ate 2 for supper at 6 with a cup of Maxwell House coffee. The whole plate cost about 30 cents. Your great-grandmother had eaten the same thing in 1912 in rural Alabama when there was no meat. If you have ever had a hot biscuit with syrup standing in for supper, you know what your people were doing. The recipe was old. Your hunger was older. Then stewed chicken with tomatoes and okra combined African American and African culinary traditions into something that fed entire congregations. Church mothers browned chicken pieces in heavy pots, then added fresh tomatoes, sliced okra, onions, and seasonings before letting everything simmer until flavors melded. Okra released natural thickening properties, creating silky sauce clinging to each chicken piece, while tomatoes added brightness. This dish was common in the Deep South, where okra grew abundantly in backyard gardens. It appeared at Wednesday night suppers and homecoming celebrations when feeding large crowds required stretching resources. Served over rice, it provided a complete meal without expensive ingredients. Stewed chicken with tomatoes and okra represented practical wisdom of church kitchens.
Peach cobbler with hand-rolled crust arrived at church suppers in rectangular pans. Golden pastry bubbling with fruit juices that caramelized at edges while centers stayed tender. Fresh peaches were sliced during summer when abundant and cheap, tossed with sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and lemon juice before being covered with pastry dough rolled thin. The cobbler baked slowly until crust turned golden and peach filling thickened into syrup pooling in corners, creating bites ranging from crispy edges to fruit-soaked centers. Churchwomen made these in home kitchens early Sunday morning, timing baking so dessert was slightly warm when served. Peaches in season cost little at roadside stands, with bruised fruit perfect since it would be cooked down anyway. The dish represented summer abundance and preserving seasonal fruit, with families often canning peaches for year-round cobblers. Children lined up eagerly, hoping for corner pieces with extra crust, while adults savored the combination that tasted like celebration.
Number 14, mustard greens with turkey neck. On a Tuesday in March 1964, a woman named Odessa Banks, who had raised 5 children in a kitchenette on East 35th Street after leaving Tupelo, Alabama, would stand at her hot plate and wash 4 pounds of fresh mustard greens, 1 leaf at a time, in a dented enamel basin. The greens cost about 12 cents a pound at the Kroger on 47th. She tore them by hand, stripped the tough stems, and layered them into a heavy pot over a single smoked turkey neck, 1 sliced onion, a pinch of red pepper flakes, and a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. They simmered covered on a low flame for 3 hours. The apartment filled with a sharp peppery steam that ran down the window pane. She served the greens in a shallow bowl with the pot liquor poured over the top, a wedge of hot water cornbread balanced on the edge. Here's the part that most people miss about a supper like this. The greens were cheap, yes. The turkey neck was cheap, yes. But the thing being passed through that kitchen was not a recipe. It was a technique that had moved 1,200 miles on a train. It was a refusal to let the cotton fields win the last word. Odessa's daughter, 17 years old and about to be the first in the family to graduate high school, sat across from her mother that Tuesday and ate a bowl of greens that tasted like 1949, like 1932, like 1912, all the way back to a woman who had stood over a cast iron pot in Lowndes County and stirred with a hickory spoon she had carved herself. The turkey neck went into a jar for Thursday's black-eyed peas. The pot liquor went into a glass and you drank it warm with salt and pepper. Nothing was wasted, nothing was forgotten. Your grandmother would have stood at Odessa's shoulder and nodded. Number 5, fried corn was summer captured in a skillet, though frozen corn made it possible any time of year. Fresh or frozen kernels were cooked in bacon drippings or butter with onion until they caramelized slightly, developing sweetness and depth. Some cooks added a splash of milk or cream near the end, creating a sauce that clung to each kernel. Salt, pepper, and sometimes a pinch of sugar balanced the flavors. The dish came together quickly, 15 minutes from start to finish, making it ideal for seniors who tired easily but craved something homemade. A bag of frozen corn cost little and provided several servings. Fried corn could stand alone as simple supper with cornbread or accompany other dishes as a beloved side, connecting those who ate it to generations of Southern tables. Before any of that meat hit the pan, there were the nights when the week had stretched thin and the pantry was down to the basics. Liver and onions with skillet gravy was the supper African-American mothers in the 1960s either loved to cook or simply had to, because beef liver was among the cheapest cuts at any butcher through that decade, sometimes less than 20 cents a pound. The trick was in the onions, and the trick was time. Sliced thin, they went into lard or bacon grease over medium-low and stayed there for 20 minutes until they turned the color of old honey and gone completely soft and sweet. The liver came next, sliced a half-inch thick, dusted in flour and salt, 3 minutes aside, no more, because overcooked liver turns grainy and bitter and forfeits everything. She knew this without being told. The pan got deglazed with a little water, the onions stirred back in, the gravy dark and thick. It divided the table every time. The people who grew up eating it still crave it. Everyone else missed out and never knew it. There was a kind of supper that didn't announce itself. No single dish you could point to, just two things cooking side by side that together made a meal. Hot water cornbread, rounds pressed by hand from cornmeal, salt and boiling water, laid into a cast iron skillet in a slick of hot grease and fried until they developed a crust you could tap with your finger. On the other eye of the stove, a pot of field peas with a smoked ham hock, cooked until the peas went soft and the broth turned silky. Together they were supper. The cornbread was for sopping. The field peas were for filling. She made it without measuring the cornmeal or timing the peas, because the hands knew the proportions and the eyes knew when the peas were done. The last time that supper appeared on this earth with all its authority was the last time those hands were in that kitchen. Number 9, crackling bread. Cracklings are the crispy remnants of pork skin and fat left over after rendering lard. Mixed into cornbread batter and baked in a cast iron skillet, they turn plain bread into something a man would eat for supper with nothing else on the plate. Each bite had a different texture depending on where the cracklings fell in the batter. Salt, crunch, and richness all in one piece of bread, making it required a supply of cracklings, which meant a family either rendered their own lard or knew someone who did. That chain broke when commercial cooking oils replaced lard in most kitchens. No lard rendering meant no cracklings. No cracklings meant no crackling bread. The whole dish depended on a process that the modern grocery store made obsolete. Number 21, opossum slow roasted with sweet potatoes. The opossum was caught at night and penned for a week, fed nothing but sweet potatoes and table scraps to clean out the taste of whatever it had been eating in the wild. After a week, the cook killed it, scalded and scraped the hide, gutted it, and laid it in a roasting pan surrounded by halved sweet potatoes and a little water. The pan went on the wood stove with a heavy lid, and the opossum roasted low for hours until the fat rendered out and basted the sweet potatoes into something rich and golden. Opossum was a winter food tied to cold weather trapping, and families who ate it did not advertise the fact to people in town. The taste was darker and fattier than pork, closer to duck than anything that walked on four legs. The sweet potatoes absorbed so much of the rendered fat that they barely needed salt. Number 25, fried bologna, not deli sliced bologna on a sandwich. Thick cut rounds from the roll, scored around the edges so they would not curl, dropped into a skillet with a little grease until the outside blistered brown and the center puffed up like a dome. This was a Tuesday night supper in black households from Memphis to Mobile through the 1960s and 1970s. 2 slices per person, a piece of white bread underneath to catch the drippings, maybe a smear of yellow mustard if the jar was not empty. The whole thing cost less than $1 and took about 4 minutes to cook. Bologna was the cheapest protein at the corner store, and a cast iron skillet turned it into something that tasted better than it had any right to. Processed meat fell out of favor. Health columns shamed it. The children who grew up on fried bologna stopped buying it for their own kids, and the supper that held a household together on a lean night became something people were embarrassed to talk about. Number 10, neck bones and rice. Smoked neck bones were the cheapest cut at the butcher counter. Big Mama browned them in a heavy pot, added water, an onion, garlic, salt, and pepper, put the lid on, and let them simmer on low until the meat pulled away from the bone. The broth turned dark and smoky. Served over white rice with the pot liquor poured on top like gravy, it was a supper that tasted like it cost 10 times what it did. The bones were small and the meat was scarce, but the flavor was concentrated and deep. Everyone worked the bones clean with their fingers. Neck bones cost almost nothing because most shoppers did not know what to do with them. Big Mama always knew. Low heat, a tight lid, enough time. Number 9, pan-fried pork chops. Thin-cut pork chops, bone in, seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, dredged through a plate of flour and laid into a cast iron skillet with hot oil. Big Mama cooked them 3 minutes aside until the flour crust turned brown and the edges went crisp. The meat stayed juicy if the skillet was hot enough, and nobody touched the chop before it was time to flip. She pulled them onto a plate and served them with rice or white bread to soak up what was left in the pan. 2 pork chops and a scoop of rice fed a grown man on a Tuesday night without complaint. The whole supper took less than 15 minutes from counter to table. The oven never came into it. Something gets lost when people talk about these suppers. The women who made them were not following recipes. They were reading the room. How hot is the house? How tired are the children? What is left in the pantry? How many days until the next grocery run? Every supper was an answer to all of those questions at once, calculated in seconds, executed without a single written instruction. The cast iron skillet was the tool, but the real instrument was the mind behind it. Decades of watching, learning, adjusting. No culinary school taught this. No cookbook captured it. It lived in the hands and the memory of women who fed families through conditions that would have shut down a restaurant kitchen. Number 9, smothered turkey wings with rice. A pack of 3 turkey wings at the corner store in Cleveland ran $2 in 1985, more than chicken parts, less than pork chops. A grandmother seasoned the wings hard with Lawry's, garlic powder, and black pepper, dredged them in seasoned flour, and browned them in a deep iron skillet for 10 minutes aside. She lifted them out, sweated 2 yellow onions and a chopped bell pepper in the drippings, stirred in 4 spoons of flour, and poured in 3 cups of water and a splash of kitchen bouquet. The gravy thickened to the color of strong tea. She nestled the wings back in, covered the pan, and let it simmer an hour and 20 minutes until the meat slid off the bone. Her kitchen filled with the smell of brown gravy and slow thyme. She served the wings over a scoop of Uncle Ben's. Rice with a side of canned green beans, warm with a knob of margarine. 3 wings, 2 suppers, 1 pot. The seniors who learned to brown a piece of meat properly never went hungry. Your grandmother went on cooking long after the world stopped expecting her to. Chitlin loaf took the tradition of chitlins and transformed them into something convenient for church fellowship tables. After chitlins were thoroughly cleaned and boiled tender, they were chopped fine and mixed with cornmeal, eggs, onions, and seasoning to form a loaf. Baked until firm and sliced thick, it could be served at room temperature, perfect for potluck, tables where dishes needed to hold up. Church mothers who made chitlin loaf were respected for their patience, as preparing chitlins required hours of careful work. The dish appeared at watch night services when traditional foods held deep significance. For many, it represented preserving ancestral foodways and honoring traditions even when shortcuts tempted. Chitlin loaf was heritage shaped into slices, served with pride where memory and faith gathered together.
Mustard potato salad appeared at every church supper in large bowls, its bright yellow color from prepared mustard distinguishing it from mayonnaise versions and giving it tangy sharpness that cut through rich meats. Potatoes were boiled until tender, then cooled and diced before being mixed with chopped onions, celery, hard-boiled eggs, sweet pickle relish, mayonnaise, and generous squirts of yellow mustard. The result was creamy and tangy with textural variety from crunchy vegetables and creamy potatoes, served cold during long gatherings. Church women made potato salad in enormous quantities, knowing it was essential accompaniment to fried fish, barbecue, or any main dish needing starchy, cool contrast. Potatoes were among cheapest vegetables available year-round, with 10-pound bags costing less than $1. The mustard added minimal cost but maximum flavor. Families developed strong preferences for their church's version.
Number 24, sweet potato pie supper. On the South Side in the 1960s, there were nights when the pie was the whole supper because the pie was what was left. A grandmother on South Wabash would buy a 5-pound bag of sweet potatoes for 29 cents, boil them in a dented pot on a hot plate, and mash them with evaporated milk, sugar, nutmeg, and a hard pat of butter. She rolled the crust out on a piece of wax paper because her kitchen had no counter. The pie baked in a borrowed oven down the hall. She served slices warm on saucers with a glass of cold milk. You sat at the kitchen table in your school clothes and you ate dessert for dinner, and nobody in the apartment called it strange. Nobody called it a hardship either. It was Tuesday. The rent was due Friday. The pie was beautiful. Back then, a pie could be a supper, and a supper could be a love letter. Number 16, skillet candied yams. Sweet potatoes were the cheapest vegetable in the southern grocery store for most of the century. You peeled and sliced them, laid them in a skillet with the butter, brown sugar, water, and cinnamon. Covered on low for 30 minutes, the yams softened and the sugar turned into a thick golden glaze. No oven, no baking dish to wash. A pound cost 19 cents in 1985. For a senior who missed holiday cooking, Skillet candied yams brought Thanksgiving to a Tuesday night. A retired seamstress in Selma made them every week because her late husband had loved them. She set his place at the table when she ate them. Some meals are not about feeding yourself. They are about remembering the person you used to feed. Ham steak with red-eye gravy was the supper that proved coffee belonged on the stove as much as in the cup. The technique ran through Southern Black cooking, going back further than anyone at that table could trace. Built from the drippings of a cured ham steak and a pour of black coffee that created something unlike any gravy made with flour. She'd fried the ham steak in a dry cast iron skillet, a thick bone-in slice from a cured country ham, rinsed before it went in to cut some of the salt, until both sides had developed a deep mahogany crust. Then, without moving the pan, she'd pour in strong black coffee, the dark kind left from the morning pot, and let it hit the drippings all at once. The sizzle was sharp and violent and over in a second, and what remained began to reduce immediately, the coffee pulling everything from the bottom and turning it into a thin, dark, savory liquid with a bitterness that had no business tasting as good as it did. You poured it over the ham, over rice, over a split biscuit. The name came from the round of fat that floated at the center, the red eye staring back up from the pan. Dry saltfish and white potatoes was the supper that arrived in Black kitchens. Through a migration older than the Great Migration, carried first through the Caribbean trade routes and the Atlantic coastline by Black communities whose fishing and preservation traditions predated the Civil War. The saltfish had to soak overnight, changed twice, because if you rushed that step, you got something closer to ocean water than food. After soaking, the fish broke into flakes and went into a pot with cubed white potatoes, sliced onion, a little oil, and just enough water to steam through. Salt, pepper, and sometimes a Scotch bonnet if someone had thought ahead. 20 minutes and the potatoes were soft, the fish was tender, and the briny depth that salt preservation created, a flavor you couldn't fake with fresh fish, had seasoned everything in the pot. In Gullah Geechee communities along the South Carolina and Georgia coasts, salted and dried fish had been a staple since before emancipation. The dish carried that coastline north. Number 10, fried corn and butter beans. This was a summer supper built from whatever the garden produced that afternoon. Fresh corn cut off the cob and fried in bacon grease with salt and black pepper until the kernels browned. Butter beans, shelled by hand on the porch, boiled until they turned soft and mealy. Together on a plate with cornbread, this was a meal that required no meat at all, which was the point. By the third week of the month, when the meat money was gone, a family ate from the garden. The corn was sweet enough to taste like dessert. The butter beans were filling enough to make a man stop reaching for more. When those families moved to cities for factory work, the garden stayed behind. The vegetables that used to grow for free now cost money, and the knowledge of how to grow them left with the generation that left the land. Number 16, chitlins with hot pepper vinegar. Chitlins were the small intestines of the hog, cleaned by hand in cold water for hours until every trace of what they once carried was gone. The cleaning was the hardest part. The cook turned each piece inside out, scraped it, rinsed it, and repeated until the water ran clear. Then they went into a pot on the wood stove with onion, bay leaf, and enough water to cover. The smell during cooking divided the house. Half the family stayed in the kitchen. The other half stayed on the porch until the pot was done. When the chitlins were tender, the cook drained them, chopped them, and served them with hot pepper vinegar on the side and a wedge of cornbread underneath. Chitlins were a winter food tied to hog killing, and every family had its own opinion about whether to fry them after boiling or leave them soft. Both sides were equally certain and equally unwilling to budge. Number 20, smothered potatoes and onions. Sliced potatoes layered with sliced onions in a cast iron skillet covered with a tight lid and cooked low and slow until everything went soft and the edges turned golden brown. Some cooks added a little bacon grease for flavor. Others threw in a few slices of streak of lean. No cream, no cheese, no butter, just potatoes, onions, seasoning, and thyme. This was a full supper in sharecropper families across the Delta, and it stayed on tables in black neighborhoods in Chicago, Detroit, and Gary well into the 1980s. It disappeared because it was too simple for a world that learned to expect more from a plate. Restaurants could not sell it. Cookbooks could not dress it up. It fed people, but it did not impress anybody, and that turned out to be fatal. Here's something that does not get said enough. The one skillet supper was not a limitation. It was engineering. A woman with 6 children and a husband pulling second shift did not have time to wash 3 pots. She did not have the counter space for them. She did not have the fuel to keep 2 burners going all evening. The skillet was the answer to every constraint at once. 1 vessel, 1 burner, 1 cleanup. And the food that came out of it was not lesser food. It was concentrated food. Everything cooked together, flavors layered into each other, drippings became sauce, and nothing left that pan without purpose. The modern kitchen has a 6-burner range and a convection oven and a drawer full of specialty pans, and still cannot produce a meal with that kind of focused efficiency. The skillet was never the problem. The skillet was the solution. Number 13, cold plate supper. Big Mama's answer on nights when even the stovetop felt like too much. A plate assembled, not cooked. Sliced lunch meat, a few pieces of cheese, a stack of crackers, a scoop of potato salad made earlier in the day, a sliced tomato from the garden, a pickle from the jar. No heat at all. The cold plate was not a failure of effort. It was a deliberate decision made by a woman who understood that feeding a family in 100-degree heat meant knowing when to leave the stove alone. Everything came from the icebox or the pantry. Assembly took 5 minutes. Cleanup was 1 plate, 1 fork, and a wipe of the counter. It proved that supper did not have to come from a flame to count as a meal. What most people miss about these meals is the calculation behind them. Big Mama was not making do, she was engineering. In a house with no air conditioning, every flame on the stove added heat to rooms that were already holding the afternoon sun. A skillet supper went from pantry to table in 15 minutes. An oven meal took an hour, used more energy, demanded more ingredients, and the kitchen stayed hot long after the food came out. The roasts, the casseroles, the baked dishes, those belonged to cooler weather and fuller wallets. In summer, efficiency was not a preference. It was the only option, and the women who solved that equation had been solving impossible problems their entire lives. Every meal on this list is evidence of a mind working faster than the heat. Number 20, cornmeal mush, sliced and pan-fried. A widow in Memphis poured leftover breakfast mush into a loaf pan and slid it into the icebox before bed. By supper time, the mush had set into a yellow brick. She turned it out, sliced it into half-inch rounds, dredged each round in flour, and pan-fried them in a 1/4 inch of bacon grease until the edges turned crisp and gold. She topped them with Caro dark syrup or a spoon of Smucker's blackberry, preserves, and ate 4 slices with a cup of black coffee. The whole supper cost her about 15 cents. What most people miss is that this was breakfast turned inside out and made to last. Your people had eaten it in a tenant farmer's cabin in 1928. Your aunt ate it in a rooming house in Memphis in 1953. The recipe had outlived 3 different stoves. Crackling cornbread elevated ordinary cornbread by folding crispy bits of rendered pork skin directly into the batter. Church mothers made cracklings by slowly rendering fatback or pork skin until pieces turned golden and crunchy. These were stirred into cornmeal batter along with buttermilk, eggs, and sugar before being poured into a smoking hot cast iron skillet. The cornbread baked until golden with a crispy bottom crust. The cracklings distributed throughout, adding pockets of salty, porky crunch. It appeared at church suppers alongside beans, greens, and stews served in wedges that disappeared quickly. Crackling cornbread represented the no-waste philosophy of African American kitchens. The dish has faded as fewer families render their own lard, leaving only memories of cornbread that was never ordinary. Number 17, black-eyed peas and rice. A retired seamstress on Prairie Avenue would soak a 1-pound bag of dry black-eyed peas overnight in cold water. The peas cost 19 cents at the Southwater Market. The next morning, she cooked them in a covered pot with a smoked ham hock, half an onion, and 3 cloves of garlic until the skin split. She spooned them over white rice and dusted the top with chopped scallion. On New Year's Day, the whole building ate it for good luck. She kept the leftover pot liquor in a jar in the icebox and used it to cook greens the next night. You did not waste a drop. Nothing went in the trash. Here is the simple beauty of the dish. It was cheap, filling, warming, and it tied you to every kitchen in the Delta that had ever been. That was enough for a Tuesday in Bronzeville. Number 6, fried bologna and eggs. This was the meal nobody bragged about, but everybody knew. A slice of thick-cut bologna, scored so it would not curl, fried in a hot skillet until the edges crisped. Then eggs cracked into the same pan, fried in the rendered fat. White bread for sopping. That was supper. A pound of bologna cost 69 cents in 1984. A dozen eggs cost 79 cents. A senior could eat this 3 nights running for less than $1. A retired sanitation worker in Nashville ate it 4 times a week for 5 years. His daughter asked why he did not cook something better. He said nothing tasted better at 10 at night than something hot from a skillet that took 3 minutes. The simplicity was the point. A meal that required no effort was a meal that got made. A meal that got made was the difference between eating and not. Fried pork chops with pan drippings. Gravy was built entirely on technique, and the technique lived in her hands. Blade-cut chops, the thin, bony ones that cost next to nothing, got seasoned hard, pressed into flour until coated white, then laid into hot lard with a sharp crack and hiss that meant the temperature was right. She'd cook them through until the crust was deep brown, then set them aside on a plate. Every bit of brown flour, rendered fat, and caramelized seasoning stuck to that cast iron was the foundation of what came next. Cold water went in, not broth, just water, and she'd work the bottom with a wooden spoon until everything loosened and rose up into the liquid, the heat pulling it all into a gravy that thickened on its own with no roux, no extra flour, just what the chops had left behind. If you had to ask how much water, you weren't ready to make it. She is gone now. That specific ratio of drippings to water, the one that made it taste like nothing else, left with her, and it has not come back. Chicken bog had been feeding South Carolina communities long before it arrived on anyone's weeknight table, born in the church fellowship halls and fish camp kitchens of the PD region, where a pot of rice, chicken, and smoked sausage could stretch to feed 50 people without anyone going hungry. A whole chicken simmered in a pot of seasoned water until the meat fell from the bone, the broth built from nothing but the bird itself. Then the chicken pulled and returned to the pot, while raw rice went in to cook directly in the chicken broth, absorbing it all, becoming a thick porridge-like dish the locals called bog, because the rice was too wet to call pilaf and too dry to call soup. By the 1960s, it had moved from church grounds into home kitchens across the PD, adapted for weeknights by grandmothers who added smoked sausage sliced into coins and reduced the simmer time by starting with bone-in thighs instead of a whole bird. She knew the technique from a woman who had learned it at a church fellowship hall in Marion County in 1944. That knowledge passed through exactly 2 pairs of hands. Number 14, chitterlings. The full word is chitterlings, though almost nobody who actually cooked them ever called them that. These are the cleaned small intestines of a hog, and they required more preparation than any other meal on this list. The cleaning alone took hours. A woman had to wash them in cold water multiple times, removing every trace of waste, turning them inside out, scraping the lining with the knife. The smell during cleaning was enough to clear a house. There were no shortcuts. Once clean, chitterlings went into a pot with onion, garlic, vinegar, and red pepper flakes and simmered for 4 to 5 hours until they turned tender. Served with hot sauce and a side of greens, they were one of the most polarizing foods in the Black community. Some families reserved them for holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas. Others ate them whenever a man brought home a bucket from the butcher, which in the 1970s cost less than $2 for 10 pounds. Cleaning chitterlings was not a chore, it was devotion, done by women who understood that a working man needed something real, and real food required real work. A man ate chitterlings in 10 minutes that his wife had spent half a day preparing, and the kitchen smelled like them for 2 days after. Younger generations refused to touch them, not because of the taste, which is mild and almost neutral when cooked properly, but because of the cleaning process and the stigma that mainstream food culture had attached to intestines. The word itself became something people whispered. What was once a staple of the Black working household became something people denied ever eating, even the families who had served them every Christmas for 50 years. That denial is its own kind of forgetting. Number 10, leather breeches. When green beans came in heavy during the summer, freedmen's families could not eat them all before they spoiled. There was no refrigeration and no canning equipment, so the beans were threaded onto long strings using a needle and heavy thread, hung from rafters or porch ceilings and left to dry in the open air until they shriveled into tough, leathery strips. That was how they got the name. Stored in cloth sacks, leather breeches kept through the entire winter. When a family needed them, a handful was dropped into a pot of water with a piece of salt pork and simmered for hours until they rehydrated and turned tender. The flavor after that long, slow cook was deeper and more concentrated than any fresh green bean, almost smoky. Leather breeches were summer preserved for winter, a bridge across the months when nothing grew. Number 2, creamed chipped beef. Thin shaved dried beef rehydrated in a skillet with butter and flour to make a thick, salty white cream gravy poured over toast or split biscuits. The military called it by a name that cannot be repeated in polite company. It came home with Black veterans after the Second World War and the Korean War, and it stayed in their kitchens for decades after the uniform came off. The dried beef was sold in small glass jars at every grocery store in America for less than $1. The gravy was heavy, salty, and fast to make. By the 1990s, the frozen food aisle had turned it into a microwavable tray, and the homemade version stopped being worth the trouble. The glass jars grew harder to find. The veterans who carried the recipe home from the mess hall got older and quieter, and most of them never wrote it down. Fried mush. Cornmeal cooked in boiling water on the stovetop until it thickened into a stiff porridge, then poured into a loaf pan and set in the icebox to firm up overnight. The next evening, Big Mama sliced it into thick rectangles and fried them in bacon grease until each side turned golden and crisp. The outside cracked under a fork. The inside stayed soft and warm and faintly sweet. Eaten with syrup poured over the top or alongside eggs and a piece of meat, fried mush was the supper that turned yesterday's leftovers into something that tasted brand new. The cornmeal cost almost nothing. The genius was in the patience to let it set and the foresight to plan 2 meals from one pot of boiled grain. Number 10, pinto beans and neck bones. A pound of pork neck bones ran 69 cents at the Kroger's in Atlanta in 1983. A pound of dry pinto beans ran 49 cents. A grandmother in West End rinsed the beans, dropped them into a heavy pot with the neck bones, 8 cups of water, a chopped onion, and 3 cloves of garlic. She set the flame on low and walked away. 3 hours later, her kitchen smelled like a Sunday at her own grandmother's table in 1933. The neck bones gave up their meat. The pot lacquer thickened on its own. She ladled the beans over a scoop of white rice and tore a square of cornbread to push the beans onto your spoon. The whole pot fed her 4 nights. $2 in groceries, 12 meals. A pot like that was not a recipe. It was your inheritance with a bone in it. Hoppin' John carried African spiritual symbolism and Southern practicality into church fellowship halls, especially on New Year's Day when the dish promised luck and prosperity. Church mothers combined black-eyed peas with rice, onions, and smoked pork, simmering everything until flavors melded into something greater than individual parts. The peas symbolized coins, and when served alongside collard greens representing paper money, the meal became both sustenance and blessing. It appeared at watch night services and New Year's gatherings where congregations celebrated together. The dish stretched to feed dozens, perfect for church suppers where budgets were tight but hospitality generous. Hoppin' John represented the blending of African foodways with Southern ingredients, a tradition that survived the Middle Passage.
Buttermilk cornbread from scratch emerged from church ovens in cast-iron skillets seasoned through decades, creating golden rounds with crispy bottoms and tender crumbs that soaked up pot liquor perfectly. Stone-ground cornmeal was mixed with buttermilk, eggs, flour, baking powder, and salt before being poured into smoking hot skillets greased with bacon drippings that created the signature crust. The result tasted nothing like store-bought varieties, with slight tang from buttermilk and richness from drippings. Churchwomen competed quietly over whose cornbread achieved perfect texture, not too dry and not too cake-like, but substantial enough to fill stomachs and complement every dish. Cornmeal was among the cheapest staples available, with 5-pound bags costing less than $1. The bread appeared at every gathering, from Wednesday fellowship to all-day singing, where stacks disappeared as quickly as they were baked. Children reached for corner pieces with extra crust, while adults appreciated how the bread stretched meals.
Number 20, chicken and dumplings. A widow on South Michigan Avenue made this every other Wednesday from a single whole chicken that cost about $1.20 at the Woolworth grocery counter. She boiled the bird with celery tops, 1 onion, and salt until the meat fell off, pulled the bones out, and dropped spoonfuls of flour and buttermilk dough into the simmering broth. The dumplings swelled soft and pillowy, soaking up the chicken flavor as they cooked. She ladled them into a deep bowl, set it on a lace doily in front of her nephew, and watched him eat without saying a word. A single pot fed her for 6 days straight, The apartment smelled like someone still cared enough to cook for you. That kind of quiet love does not need a recipe card. It only needs a pot and a reason to keep going. Number 17, fried catfish with skillet. Cornbread, a catfish fillet dusted in seasoned cornmeal and fried in cast iron until the crust crackled. When the fish came out, you poured cornbread batter right into the same skillet with the drippings still hot. The cornbread baked on the stovetop, covered, soaking up every trace of catfish flavor. In the Delta, this was Friday night. A pound of catfish cost $1.29 in 1992. A retired bus driver named Clarence Hayes in Greenville ate this every Friday for 9 years. He caught the catfish himself from an oxbow lake. He said the skillet remembered his wife's seasoning. He said cornbread tasted better in her pan than in any new one. That was not superstition. That was 60 years of a woman's cooking baked into the iron. Stuffed cabbage rolls with tomato sauce arrived in African-American kitchens through the North, carried sideways into Black households in Chicago and Detroit after the Great Migration, where the technique traveled from Eastern European immigrant neighbors across back fences and church suppers. She blanched the whole cabbage head in boiling water until the outer leaves softened and peeled away clean, lay each leaf flat, and piled the center with a mix of ground beef, cooked rice, diced onion, salt, pepper, and a spoonful of the tomato paste that held it all together. The leaf got folded in from the sides, rolled tight, set seam side down in a baking dish. Tomato sauce went over the top, the dish covered with foil and baked low and slow until the rolls had softened completely and the sauce had reduced into something thick and dark and deeply savory. It took the whole afternoon. The people who watched her make it never thought to write it down, and now the whole recipe is gone with the woman who knew it. Chicken and rice with onion gravy was the dish that made a Tuesday feel like Sunday without asking anything extra of the week. Bone-in chicken thighs, browned in a cast iron skillet until the skin blistered, removed while thick sliced onions went into the drippings and cooked until they softened and went translucent and sweet. Then a splash of broth and a spoon of flour stirred in to thicken everything into gravy. The raw rice went in dry, stirred into the gravy so every grain turned tan. Then the chicken pieces laid back on top, a lid put on, and the whole thing left to steam over low heat for 15 minutes. What came out was rice saturated all the way through with chicken fat and onion gravy, the chicken fall apart tender and releasing whatever was left in the bone right into the pot. It was a Sunday caliber dish made on a Tuesday by a woman who understood that the technique was the recipe, not the clock. She is gone. The dish survives her, though it never tastes quite the same. Number 24, sardines and crackers. This wasn't even a sit-down meal. A working man pulled a tin from the cabinet, peeled back the lid, and ate standing over the sink. Saltine crackers on the side, maybe a slice of raw onion if there was one. No cooking, no dishes, just protein and salt after 10 hours on a loading dock. Sardines were packed in cottonseed oil or mustard sauce, and a man could keep a dozen tins in the pantry for weeks without refrigeration. The canneries in Maine and Louisiana put out millions of cans a year through the 1970s. By the 1990s, most of those canneries had closed. What replaced them was frozen fish sticks that cost 3 times as much and tasted like cardboard. Before the next one, for those who want suppers like these and the rest this channel has covered, all in one place, they are in a book called Big Mama's Soul Food Kitchen at my website, thehungryhistorian.com. That is the only mention you will get. If you want it, it is there. Now, back to the list. Number 7, whole hog jowl, slow cooked with dried field peas. Hog jowl was the cheek of the pig, cured in salt and smoked over hickory in the smokehouse behind the house. The cook soaked the dried field peas overnight in a bowl of well water, put them in a heavy cast iron pot with the jowl laid on top, added water just to the level of the beans, and set the pot on the wood stove before dawn. The fire had to stay low and steady for hours, which meant somebody was feeding it split logs every hour while the rest of the household went about the day's work. By late afternoon, the peas had absorbed the salt and smoke from the jowl, and the meat had gone so tender it broke apart at the touch of a wooden spoon. This was a Saturday supper that took half a day and every woman in the house to finish, because someone had to mind the fire while the others did the washing and the ironing and the sweeping. The division of labor was understood without being spoken. When the pot finally came off the stove, the jowl went on a platter in the center of the table, the peas went into a serving bowl with the cooking liquid still in them, and the cornbread went on a plate next to everything. Nobody spoke for the first 5 minutes of that meal. Forks and spoons did the talking. The cook, who could time a jowl and a pot of peas to finish together on a wood stove that ran on split hickory, and guesswork had done something no recipe could teach. Number 5, lace cornbread. Cornmeal batter mixed thin as crepe batter and poured into a screaming hot, well-greased skillet so it spread out in a lacy pattern full of crisp holes and thin bridges. Cooked fast on high heat until the edges browned and the whole thing could be flipped in one piece like a pancake. The texture was pure crunch, nothing soft about it, and it shattered when you bit through it. Lace cornbread was a specialty of the Mississippi Delta and the Alabama Black Belt, made by women who knew exactly how thin to mix the batter and exactly how hot the grease needed to be. It was supper alongside a bowl of field peas or a plate of greens. The technique required a practiced hand and a properly seasoned skillet. Neither one transferred easily to the next generation. Number 23, fried bologna sandwich. A thick slice of bologna, 2 slits in the center so it lay flat, dropped into a hot skillet with a little oil until the edges curled and the surface browned crispy. White bread, yellow mustard. That was the whole meal. On the hottest nights across the South, when standing over a stove for more than 5 minutes felt like a sentence, this was what appeared on the table. It was fast, it was cheap. Children loved it without being told to. A fried bologna sandwich with a handful of chips and a cold glass of Kool-Aid turned a miserable August evening into something a child carried with them for decades. Number 15, sweet potato pone, the cheap version. The Sunday version called for pecans and butter and brown sugar by the cup. The Tuesday version, the senior on a fixed check version, called for what was already on the counter. A grandmother in Charleston grated 3 sweet potatoes on the wide side of her box grater, beat in 2 eggs, half a cup of carnation evaporated milk, a 1/4 cup of Domino sugar, a splash of vanilla, and a handful of self-rising flour. She poured the batter into a buttered iron skillet and slid it into a 350 oven for 45 minutes. No pecans, no bourbon, no glaze. The top went burnt orange and crackled like a leaf. The middle stayed soft and almost custard. She ate a square hot from the skillet with a cup of black coffee on the porch and watched the sun go behind the live oaks. Your people had been making it like this since 1865. Tradition does not need pecans. Tradition needs your hands. Chicken and cornmeal dumplings stretched one bird to feed an entire congregation when times were lean, but faith remained strong. Church mothers simmered a whole chicken until meat fell from bones, creating rich golden broth, fragrant with celery, onion, and bay leaf. Cornmeal dumplings were mixed by hand, combining cornmeal with flour, baking powder, and lard, then dropped by spoonfuls into bubbling broth. As they cooked, dumplings swelled and absorbed chicken essence, becoming soft pillows floating in savory liquid. The dish was ladled into bowls at homecomings, repasts, and revival week suppers. This represented resourcefulness and community, showing how one chicken could become a feast through skilled hands and generous spirits willing to share whatever they had.
Fried chicken wings with hot sauce were less expensive than whole chickens or breasts, making them practical for feeding church crowds while providing crispy, savory chicken everyone loved. Chicken wings were heavily seasoned with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika before being dredged in seasoned flour and dropped into hot oil that turned skin golden and crunchy. The wings were fried until cooked through and crispy, then tossed with hot sauce while warm so the spicy, vinegary sauce coated every surface. The result was addictive, with crunchy coating giving way to tender meat and tangy heat that made people reach for more. Church fish fries often included chicken wings alongside fish, providing options for those who preferred poultry. Wings cost significantly less per pound than other chicken parts and cooked quickly, making them economical and practical. Hot sauce added minimal expense but transformed plain fried wings into something with personality. Children who couldn't handle heat ate wings without sauce.
Number 11, red beans and rice with hot links. This supper came up from New Orleans through Memphis and settled in a kitchenette on South Parkway. A widow who had cooked in the dining car of the Panama Limited for 18 years would soak a pound of dried red beans overnight and cook them all day Monday with a smoked ham hock, 2 sliced hot links, an onion, green bell pepper, celery, thyme, bay leaf, and garlic. The aroma walked up the stairwell and into every apartment on the 3rd floor. She served a ladle of beans over a scoop of steamed white rice, the sliced hot links on top for color. A bowl cost her about 18 cents to make. She fed anyone who knocked on her door. Monday was Red Beans Day, and nobody in the building ever needed a reminder. The simple rhythm of that weekly supper kept the whole hallway healthy and warm. Number 7, fried pork chops were the centerpiece of countless soul food suppers, requiring only a few ingredients but delivering deep satisfaction. Thin-cut chops were seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, dredged in seasoned flour, then fried in a skillet until golden brown and crispy outside while staying juicy within. The rendered fat left in the pan became the base for gravy, stretching the meal even further. For seniors, pork chops were economical. A package contained several chops at a price far below beef, and the cooking was straightforward. The smell of pork frying brought back memories of family suppers and Sunday dinners. Served with rice and gravy, greens, or simply with bread, fried pork chops proved that simple cooking, done well, created meals worth remembering. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and ground beef were how she turned a quarter pound of meat into supper for 5 people without anyone at the table noticing the math. Green peppers got their tops cut off and seeds scooped out, then stood upright in a baking dish like cups waiting to be filled. The filling was where the calculation lived: ground beef, browned with diced onion, then mixed with cooked white rice at a ratio that he tilted hard toward the rice, sometimes 2 cups to every half cup of meat, stretched further with tomato sauce stirred through. She'd taste it, adjust the salt, add garlic powder and black pepper, then pack each pepper until the filling mounded above the rim. A spoonful of sauce went over the top of each one before the dish went uncovered into a 350-degree oven, where it stayed until the peppers softened and the tops browned slightly. The finished dish looked like abundance, a full pepper per person, steaming, smelling of tomato and browned meat. Nobody could tell how far the meat had been stretched. She never told. You never asked. That was the agreement in those kitchens. Hominy and smoked sausage was one of those 1960s pantry suppers that some people remember and most people have stopped thinking about entirely. A can of hominy, white or yellow, drained and rinsed, dropped into a pot with sliced smoked sausage, browning in its own fat, then a can of diced tomatoes, a diced onion, and a pinch of red pepper flakes simmered together for 12 minutes until the hominy had absorbed the sausage fat and the tomatoes had broken down into a rough sauce. Done. Hominy itself had deep roots in indigenous food traditions. Dried corn treated with an alkaline solution through a process called nixtamalization, which unlocked nutrients unavailable in untreated corn and created a chewy, substantial grain unlike anything else in the pantry. African American kitchens in the Deep South adopted it generations before the 1960s, finding in it the same filling, economical, one-pot quality that made it useful when the week had more days than money. She kept 2 cans on the shelf at all times. You always knew the week was going sideways when both cans disappeared. Number 11, fried chicken backs and necks. Grocery stores in the 1970s sold chicken backs and necks by the bag for almost nothing. These were the parts left over after the breasts, thighs, and drumsticks were packaged at higher prices. Seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, then fried in a deep skillet until the skin was dark and crackling. A man ate them with his hands, pulling small bites of meat from between the bones. There was no polite way to eat a chicken back. It required teeth and patience and a pile of napkins. Children fought over the necks. The backs had pockets of fat that rendered during frying and left the meat impossibly moist. Grocery chains stopped selling them to the public, grinding them into pet food and processed chicken meal instead. The profit was higher that way. A man's supper became an animal's. Number 18, skillet fried dove with pepper gravy. Dove season in the Delta meant boys came home from the fields with a dozen small birds that barely filled a palm. The cook plucked them, split them down the breast, and fried them in bacon grease on the wood stove until the skin went tight and crisp. The meat was dark and lean and tasted nothing like chicken. After the doves came out of the skillet, the cook stirred flour into the hot grease, added milk, cracked black pepper heavy, and let the gravy thicken over low heat. The doves went back onto the plate with biscuits to soak up what was left. A single dove was barely 2 bites of meat, which meant the gravy and the biscuits were doing most of the work. Nobody said that out loud, but the cook knew it, and she made sure the gravy was good enough to carry the whole plate. Number 21, hoe cake. Not a fancy cornbread, a flat cake of cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt, fried in lard on a hot skillet until the bottom turned golden brown and the top set firm enough to flip. The name came from field workers who cooked them on the flat blade of a garden hoe held over an open fire. By the 1950s, the hoe was gone, but the name stuck in black communities from the Carolinas to East Texas. Hoe cakes were supper when there was nothing else in the house. 2 or 3 of them stacked on a plate with a ladle of pot liquor from whatever greens had been cooked earlier that week. They cost almost nothing to make. A bag of cornmeal lasted weeks, and the lard was rendered at home. The technique was simple enough that children learned it young. Jiffy cornbread mix and store-bought dinner rolls pushed them out by the time the 1980s arrived, and the word hoe cake itself started to sound old-fashioned. Number 12, pimiento cheese on saltine crackers. A block of sharp cheddar grated into a bowl, a small jar of diced pimientos drained and stirred in, enough mayonnaise to hold it together, salt, pepper, and a pinch of cayenne. Big Mama mixed it with a fork until it turned into a thick orange spread with flecks of red pepper running through it. She packed it into a jar and kept it in the icebox all week. On the nights too hot to stand near a burner, she set the jar on the table with a sleeve of saltines, and that was supper. Spread thick on a cracker and eaten in 2 bites, pimento cheese had a sharpness and a slow heat that made plain crackers feel like a meal. No stove, no dishes, just a jar, a knife, and a stack of crackers pulled apart at the table. Time equals 1 second / greater than number 11. Number 6, greens cooked all day with a smoked turkey neck. 2 pounds of collard greens ran 69 cents a pound at the corner market in Atlanta in 1985. A smoked turkey neck ran $1.20. A grandmother in Vine City started the pot in the morning. She dropped the turkey neck into 8 cups of water with a halved onion and a clove of garlic and let it simmer 90 minutes until the broth turned the color of weak coffee and your kitchen smelled like the back room of a smokehouse. She washed the greens 3 times in the sink to get the grit out, stripped the tough stems, stacked the leaves, and rolled them tight before slicing them ribbon thin. Into the pot, a teaspoon of red pepper flakes, a splash of cane vinegar. The lid went on. She let it cook 3 more hours on the lowest flame, stirring once an hour. By supper time, the greens had collapsed into a tangle and the pot liquor had gone dark and shining. She poured a cup of pot liquor into a coffee mug and drank it at the counter. That was the cook's portion. The greens went over rice with a square of hot water cornbread to soak up the rest. Smoked turkey neck was the 1980s adjustment after a ham hock had climbed past $2. What most people miss is that what changed was the bone, and what stayed was everything that mattered. The recipe was older than the country. It had been carried from West Africa, where greens cooked with smoked meat were already a method by 1700. It had survived the plantation, the tenant farm, the kitchenette in Bronzeville, and the small apartment off Northside Drive, where a 78-year-old woman ate a bowl of it with cornbread and sweet tea on a Tuesday alone with the news on low. The pot liquor was your inheritance. The neck was the receipt. The greens were the proof that a poor woman with a heavy pot could feed herself like she still mattered. Liver mush appeared on fellowship tables in the Carolinas and parts of Virginia, combining liver with cornmeal into a loaf that could be sliced and fried. Church mothers simmered pork liver until tender, then ground or mashed it before mixing with cornmeal, broth, and seasonings. The mixture was packed into loaf pans and chilled until firm enough to slice. For serving, slices were fried in hot fat until crispy outside while remaining soft inside. The flavor was mild and earthy, cornmeal mellowing the liver's intensity. Liver mush appeared at breakfast fellowships and Wednesday night suppers, where economical dishes were appreciated. It represented regional variations in African American church cooking, recipes that traveled only as far as the congregations who loved them. The dish has faded as taste changed.
Chess pie with cornmeal was Southern dessert tradition that appeared regularly at church suppers, its simple ingredients transforming into something rich and sweet. Eggs, sugar, butter, cornmeal, vinegar, and vanilla were whisked together and poured into unbaked pie crusts, then baked slowly until filling set firm with slightly caramelized top. The cornmeal gave the pie subtle texture and nutty flavor that distinguished it from plain custard pies, while vinegar added brightness, balancing sweetness. The result was dense and sweet with slight graininess that made each bite interesting, served at room temperature in thin slices. Chess pie required only pantry staples that most families already had, making it economical for church desserts feeding dozens. Churchwomen competed quietly over whose chess pie achieved perfect balance of sweetness and texture. The pie represented cooking that made much from little, proving sophistication did not require expensive ingredients or complex techniques.
Number 23, chitlins with vinegar and hot sauce. This was the supper that tied a black family in Chicago directly back to a farm in the Delta. because chitlins were the part of the hog. White folks had always thrown away. A woman on East Garfield would buy 10 pounds of chitterlings from the corner meat market for about 39 cents a pound, clean them in her kitchen sink for 3 hours, and simmer them on a low flame with an onion, a whole clove of garlic, and a bay leaf for 4 hours. The apartment would smell for 2 days. She served them in a shallow bowl with white vinegar and a bottle of red hot sauce, a slice of white bread on the saucer to sop up the pot liquor. Old-timers from Alabama came from 3 buildings over when they heard she was cooking. They sat at her card table and they did not speak for the first bowl. That was reverence. That was a memory you could chew. Number 8, smothered cabbage with sausage. 1 head of cabbage, 1 link of smoked sausage. The sausage went into the skillet first, sliced into thick rounds, browned until the fat rendered. Then the cabbage went in on top with a splash of water. Covered on low for 45 minutes, the cabbage turned silky and soaked up every drop of smoky flavor. A head of cabbage cost 30 cents in 1987. A sausage link cost 50 cents. For a senior with stiff hands, there was almost no knife work. You could tear the cabbage with your fingers. A retired church deacon in Little Rock made smothered cabbage every Tuesday for 8 years. He had never cooked before his wife's death in 1984. A woman from his congregation taught him 3 skillet meals. This was the one he never tired of. He said learning to feed himself at 72 was the second hardest thing he ever did. The first was learning to eat alone. Dried lima beans with smoked sausage were a different creature entirely from the small green limas that came frozen in a bag, and if you confused them, you'd understand immediately why. Large dried limas, soaked overnight until they'd swelled and the skins had gone taut, then drained and rinsed, went into a pot with fresh water, brought to a boil and dropped to a steady simmer. Smoked sausage went in partway through, sliced into coins, giving up its smokiness and staining the pot a warm amber that meant the broth was building. By the time the limas were done, fully soft but holding their shape, the broth had gone thick and slightly cloudy and deeply flavored in the way that only long-cooked beans can manage. Salt and black pepper went in at the end, never the beginning, because salting the water from the start toughens the skins and keeps the beans from softening properly. She knew that. She knew 100 small things like that, and she is gone now, and most of those things went with her. Skillet pork and sweet potatoes was the kind of supper that turned 2 cheap ingredients into something that looked and tasted deliberate. Pork shoulder pieces or country-style ribs cut into chunks and browned in lard until the edges crisped, then sweet potatoes peeled and diced into the same skillet, cubes small so they'd cook fast, with a splash of water to steam everything through. A lid dropped on, and the heat kept at medium for 12 minutes until the potatoes were fork tender and had soaked up every bit of pork fat in the pan. The combination was older than the skillet itself. West African food traditions paired yams and pork centuries before the American South claimed the combination as its own, and the sweet potato, botanically distinct from the yam but occupying the same cultural space in black kitchens, brought natural sweetness that needed no sugar added. A little hot sauce on the side, maybe a wedge of cornbread if there was time. Done. Number 25, fried bologna on white bread. 1 thick slice of bologna, scored twice with a knife so it wouldn't curl, then dropped into a cast iron skillet with just enough grease to make it blister. 2 slices of white bread, maybe mustard, maybe not. The whole thing took 5 minutes and cost less than a quarter. In the 1970s, bologna was what filled the gap between paychecks. It wasn't something a man requested. It was something his wife could make when the icebox was nearly bare and the man still needed to eat before he fell asleep. The big meat companies killed it by shrinking the slices and raising the price until it stopped being cheap enough to justify. What had been a staple became a luxury nobody asked for. Number 6, smokehouse sausage with stewed apples. The sausage was made during hog killing season, seasoned with sage and red pepper, stuffed into natural casings, and hung in the smokehouse until needed. A link came down when the cook called for it. She sliced it into thick rounds, fried them in a skillet on the wood stove until the casings popped and the fat rendered out, then added sliced apples from the tree near the porch and a spoonful of sugar. The apples cooked down into something soft and sweet that played against the salt and heat of the sausage. This was a fall supper that only lasted as long as the smokehouse supply and the apple tree cooperated. By midwinter, both were spent, and the memory of that combination had to carry until the next hog was killed and the next tree bore fruit. Number 4, skillet rice and onions. Plain white rice cooked with diced onions in a cast iron skillet with a spoonful of bacon grease, stirred occasionally until the rice toasted slightly on the bottom and the onions went translucent and sweet. Sometimes a splash of soy sauce from a bottle that had been in the cabinet for years. Sometimes just salt and black pepper. This was not a side dish. This was the meal. In households where the grocery money ran out before the month did, skillet rice and onions was what appeared on the table 3 or 4 nights in a row without apology. It cost almost nothing. It filled the belly. It kept body and soul connected until payday. Nobody talks about it now because nobody wants to remember that rice and onions was all there was. Number 17, Spam sliced and fried with eggs. Big Mama cut the block into thick slabs, laid them flat in a hot skillet, and let each side crisp until the edges turned dark and salty. While the Spam browned, she cracked eggs into the grease around it. The eggs fried and rendered fat and came out with lacy brown edges and soft yolks. Served on a plate with white rice or a piece of bread, Spam and eggs was a supper that took less than 10 minutes and used exactly 1 pan. The can sat in the pantry for months without worry. On a Thursday night in August, when the grocery run was still 2 days away, Big Mama opened that can and nobody went to bed hungry. Number 7, salmon patties and pinto beans, the full plate. A retired school teacher in Memphis served salmon patties and pinto beans together as 1 plate, a habit she had carried up from the Mississippi Delta in 1962. The patties came from a single can of double Q pink salmon, the beans from a pot she had simmered the day before. She ladled a scoop of beans onto the left side of the plate, set 2 hot patties on the right, and tucked a square of hot water cornbread between them like a small wall, a spoon of pot liquor over the beans, a glass of buttermilk on the side. The plate ran her about $1.20 in 1985. She ate it watching the 6 o'clock news. The patties hissed when she set them on the plate. The beans pooled around the cornbread. The buttermilk went down cold. A senior with 1 can and 1 pot had a plate that did not look like poverty. To you and to her, it looked like dinner. Smothered turkey wings became a church supper staple when families sought something affordable but equally satisfying for feeding crowds. Church mothers seasoned the meaty wings with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika before browning them until skin turned crispy. Onions softened in pan drippings before wings were returned and covered with rich gravy made from pan juices thickened with flour. Everything simmered until meat became tender enough to fall from bone while gravy turned silky. Served over rice or with cornbread, smothered turkey wings fed dozens at pastoral anniversaries and homecomings. The dish stretched modest budgets while still feeling celebratory. Though turkey wings remain available, the slow-smothered preparation has given way to quicker methods that cannot match the depth church mothers achieved.
Turnip greens with pot liquor simmered for hours in church kitchens, filling buildings with their distinctive aroma signaling traditional Southern cooking. Fresh turnip greens were washed multiple times to remove grit, then added to large pots with ham hocks, onions, garlic, vinegar, sugar, and red pepper flakes that balanced the greens' natural bitterness. The greens cooked down until tender and dark, releasing juices into cooking liquid that became rich pot liquor. The pot liquor was the treasure, thick with vitamins and flavor, often drunk from cups or sopped with cornbread. Churchwomen understood greens required proper seasoning and long cooking to transform them from tough leaves into tender vegetables. Turnip greens cost almost nothing, often donated by families. The dish connected congregations to agricultural traditions and represented cooking that sustained families through lean times while providing nutrition. Children learned to appreciate greens early, understanding they were non-negotiable parts of supper plates.
Number 19, smelt fry at the lakefront. Every April in the 1960s, black families from 43rd Street would walk down to 31st Street Beach at midnight with charcoal, cornmeal, and an old iron skillet. The smelt were running. Men stood knee-deep in the freezing lake with dip nets and pulled up silver fish the size of a finger, 100 at a pass. The women dredged the fish whole in seasoned cornmeal and fried them on a grill on the sand while the children slept on blankets. You ate them bones and all, crunching through the tail with a squeeze of lemon and a dash of hot sauce. A grandfather who had grown up fishing the Yazoo River would smile and say the lake remembered him. Here's the part that surprised me about that night on the beach. It was free food, fresh food, and a ritual that tied Mississippi boyhood to a Chicago spring. That mattered more than any restaurant meal ever did. Number 23, sardines and grits skillet. Most people under 40 have never eaten sardines on purpose. But for black seniors who grew up in the rural South, a can of sardines was a meal in itself. You cooked your grits in the skillet with water and salt until they thickened. Then you laid the sardines on top and added hot sauce. A can cost 25 cents in 1978. A pound of grits cost 35 cents and lasted 2 weeks. For a senior with arthritis who could not grip a knife or handle raw meat, this was the world's easiest hot supper. You opened a can, you stirred a skillet, you sat down and ate. A retired domestic worker in Greenville, South Carolina, ate sardines and grits 4 nights a week for 6 years after her husband's passing in 1982. She said the meal reminded her of her father, who ate the same thing every night after working the tobacco fields. The navy bean soup was the supper built from what the pantry held steady. Dried navy beans went in after an overnight soak, brought to a boil, and dropped to the lowest simmer the gas burner could manage. Smoked turkey next went in early, not as garnish, but as the whole foundation of flavor. And over 4 or 5 hours, they released their smoke and collagen and deep savory fat until the broth had transformed into something else entirely. By late afternoon, the beans had softened and begun to break apart at the edges, thickening the liquid from the inside. The pot turned a deep, cloudy tan that meant it was nearly ready. She'd taste it, adjust the salt, maybe add another pinch of black pepper. Bowls came out with cornbread on the side and a splash of hot sauce if you wanted it. There was no recipe for this soup. There was a turkey neck, a bag of beans, a pot, and a woman who made it enough times to know it was done by the color of the broth and the way the kitchen smelled after the 3rd hour. Navy bean and fatback soup was the supper that the neighborhood could smell through the screen door from half a block away. Fatback, the pure salt-cured fat cut from the back of the pig with a strip of lean running through it, went into a pot of navy beans that had soaked since morning with water, diced onion, and a little black pepper, and cooked for 30 to 40 minutes until the beans went silky and the fat had completely dissolved into the broth, leaving only its flavor behind. The broth was salt porky and thick and so deeply seasoned that nothing needed to be added at the end. It was ladled hot over cornbread, crumbled in the bottom of a bowl, the bread soaking up the liquid and swelling into something between soup and porridge. Navy beans had been a Southern staple since the early 19th century, cheap and shelf-stable and capable of feeding a family of 8 from a single pound of dried beans that cost almost nothing. She kept a 5-pound bag in the cabinet. When the bag ran low, she bought another before it ran out. That was the rule. Number 20, stewed tomatoes and rice, a can of whole tomatoes, a pot of white rice, salt, pepper, and maybe a spoon of sugar to cut the acid. That was supper. It sounds like poverty, and it was, but it was also one of the best tasting cheap meals a person could put together in under 20 minutes. The tomatoes broke apart in the pot and turned the rice pink. A working man ate this with a piece of cornbread on the side and didn't think twice about it. Stewed tomatoes and rice showed up in shotgun houses from New Orleans to Charlotte, always made the same way, always eaten without ceremony. The dish vanished, not because it failed, but because it was too simple to survive a generation that measured food by how complicated it looked on a plate. Number 19, hoe cake fried in bacon drippings. A hoe cake was cornbread cooked flat in a skillet instead of baked in a pan. Cornmeal, water, salt, and a spoonful of bacon grease saved in a tin on the back of the wood stove. The cook dropped the batter into the hot skillet and pressed it thin with the back of a spoon. Each cake fried until the edges went lace brown and the center held firm enough to pick up with bare fingers. The name came from the field hoe that workers once used as a griddle over an open fire, and by the time the wood stove arrived in the cabin, the name stuck even though the hoe was back in the shed. Hoe cakes were faster than biscuits and used less flour, which made them the default bread on nights when supper had to be on the table in minutes, not hours. Number 24, scrambled eggs with tomatoes and onions. A can of stewed tomatoes, half an onion chopped rough, and 3 or 4 eggs beaten with a fork. The tomatoes went in first with the onion, cooked down in a skillet until most of the liquid burned off. Then the eggs got folded in and scrambled wet so the curds turned orange and soft. Eaten straight from the pan with a piece of cornbread or a cold biscuit left over from the morning. In rural Alabama and Mississippi, this was a full supper, not a breakfast. The eggs came from the yard. The tomatoes came from the pantry shelf. The onion came from the garden row behind the house. Nobody wrote a recipe for it because nobody thought it qualified as real cooking. It was just what you did when the icebox was bare and the store was closed. Number 12, smothered cabbage with smoked turkey wing. Cabbage was 19 cents a pound in 1985, and a smoked turkey wing ran about $1.50. A grandmother in Detroit dropped the wing into a heavy pot with 4 cups of water and let it simmer an hour until the broth turned smoky and the meat fell off the bone. She pulled the wing out, shredded the meat back into the pot, and added a head of cabbage chopped rough, a yellow onion, a teaspoon of red pepper flakes, and a spoon of Crisco. 40 minutes covered on a low flame. The cabbage went silky. The pot lacquer went gold. She served it over a scoop of Uncle Ben's rice with a square of Jiffy cornbread on the side. The whole pot fed her 4 nights. She froze 2 portions. For the weekend, her grandson came up from Memphis. Smoked turkey was the late 70s adjustment after the price of a ham hock had climbed past your budget. The flavor stayed, the bone changed. Pepper jelly glazed ham brought sweet heat to church fellowship tables during Easter and Christmas when something special was required. Church mothers scored cured hams in diamond patterns, then brushed them with homemade pepper jelly, combining sweet preserves with fiery peppers. As the ham baked, the glaze caramelized into a sticky, spicy sweet coating that crackled with each slice. The pepper jelly was often made from garden peppers, preserved during summer, connecting holiday meals to harvest pass. This ham appeared at pastoral installations and major holiday gatherings where presentation mattered as much as flavor. It represented elevating special occasions through food showing effort and care. Though pepper jelly remains available, the tradition of glazing hams this way has largely faded from fellowship halls. Number 12, fried lake perch. On Friday afternoons in the 1960s, a black man with an ice cooler parked his truck at 39th and Cottage Grove and sold yellow perch, fresh from Lake Michigan, at $1.50 a pound. A retired Pullman porter from Canton, Mississippi, would buy 2 pounds, bring them home to his kitchenette, and scale them at the kitchen sink with the back of a butter knife. He dredged the perch in yellow cornmeal, seasoned with salt, black pepper, and a hard shake of cayenne, and fried them golden in a half-inch of lard in a cast-iron skillet. He served them whole, heads on, with hot water cornbread and a bowl of coleslaw made with sugar and vinegar. He ate with his fingers, pulling the sweet white meat off the bones the same way his father had taught him 50 years earlier on the banks of the Pearl River. The lake remembered him. He remembered his father. Number 14, tomato and rice skillet. A can of tomatoes, a cup of rice, an onion, a little bacon grease. That was the recipe 1,000 black grandmothers made on the nights between paydays. You sauteed the onion, added tomatoes and rice with enough water to cook the grain, and covered it for 20 minutes. The rice turned red. In the Gullah Geechee communities, this was called red rice, and it traced a direct line back to West African jollof. A retired shrimper in Beaufort made red rice 3 nights a week for 10 years. His skillet had been in the family for 4 generations. His great-grandmother cooked rice in the same pan when she was enslaved on a low-country plantation. The pan outlived the plantation. The recipe outlived the people who tried to own the people who made it. Stewed tomatoes over white rice sounds too simple to be a supper, and in a lot of 1960s households, it showed up when the week had gone tight, but that framing misses what she actually did to it. The tomatoes went into a saucepan with a generous spoon of butter and a pinch of sugar, the move nobody outside these kitchens knew about. The sugar cut the acid without making it sweet, and the butter rounded out the sharpness of the can. She let it reduce for 15 or 20 minutes until it thickened into something closer to a sauce. The rice was already done. She plated first and ladled the tomatoes over the top. Hot, enough that steam rose off the bowl. 3 ingredients, less than 15 minutes. Everything came down to 2 small details she never wrote down, and neither did anyone else. Stewed tomatoes and okra came together in one cast iron skillet in less time than it took to set the table. Fresh or canned tomatoes went in first with diced onion and a little bacon grease. Then sliced okra, cut thick, never thin, because thin sliced okra disintegrates and the elders knew the difference. Added in the last 8 minutes so it stayed toothsome and didn't turn to mush. Salt, pepper, and a pinch of cayenne. That was it. Served over white rice, this dish had West African ancestry that predated the American South by centuries. Okra arrived in the Americas through the transatlantic slave trade, carried by enslaved West Africans who understood it as a staple crop and a natural thickener, and it planted itself in Gullah, Creole, and Deep South kitchens where it never left. She didn't. need a reason to make it. The okra was in season. That was reason enough. Before the slow cooker arrived to pretend it had invented one-pot cooking, your grandmother was already doing this with a Dutch oven and a gas flame set to medium-low. The parking lot emptied, but that smell hung in the fellowship hall until Monday morning. The women who made those plates never asked for credit. They just showed up early and stayed late. If your family had a church supper dish that belongs on this list, drop it in the comments. Name the dish, name the church, name the woman who made it. And if you have not made a sweet potato pie from scratch in a while, this week is the week.